Hello guys, welcome to Goofy Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. Movie Ainz Ooal named Harry as the 42nd Supreme Being and gave him command over Nazarick. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Fracture. The clock read 23:57. 3 minutes. 3 minutes until Yggdrasil's servers went dark forever and 12 years of memories dissolved into nothing. Harold Ashenbane sat cross-legged on the floor of an empty guild hall, not his guild hall, because his guild had died 2 years ago, and watched the seconds bleed away on his HUD. The hall belonged to no one now. Some mid-tier guild called Silver Phoenix had claimed it once back when the game was thriving, but they'd abandoned it like everyone else. Harry had found it while wandering the lower floors of Helheim during his final hours, looking for anything that felt like a proper place to die, digitally speaking. He opened his inventory one last time, scrolled past the endless list of spells, artifacts, banned equipment, and the single world item that had made him infamous on 3 servers. Void Mantle, the item that let a world breaker do what no other class could, treat all magic as raw material, copy it, eat it, spit it back out twice as hard. The devs had tried to patch it out 4 times. Each time the code resisted in ways that made the programmers mutter about spaghetti architecture and existential dread. Harry, real name Haruto Kimura, 29, salary worker at a mid-sized logistics company in Chiba, perpetually single, owner of one geriatric cat named Potato, closed the inventory and sighed. What a waste, he muttered. Not the game. The game had been extraordinary. The waste was everything around it. The job that sucked his soul dry. The apartment that smelled like convenience store bento and regret. The life he'd built his avatar to escape from. Harold Ashenbane was everything Haruto Kimura wasn't: powerful, feared, free. And in 3 minutes, Harold would be dead too. 23:58, he stood up, might as well be standing when it happened, some dignity in that at least. The guild hall flickered, Harry frowned, graphical glitch. The textures on the walls shuddered, stone rippling like water, and for a moment the floor beneath his feet felt soft, which was impossible because Yggdrasil didn't have haptic feedback. You couldn't feel the floor, you couldn't feel anything, but he felt it. 23:59, the hall cracked, not the building, reality. A fissure tore through the air in front of him, bright and wrong, like someone had taken a knife to the screen of the universe and sliced it open. Through the gap, Harry saw darkness, not game darkness, not the rendered shadows of Helheim, true darkness, the kind that breathed. The fissure lunged, it swallowed him whole. The first thing Harry registered was that he was cold, actually physically cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your joints and makes your fingers ache. He was lying face down on stone, real stone, with texture and temperature and the faint grit of dust against his cheek. He opened his eyes. A ceiling stretched above him, impossibly high, carved from black marble veined with gold. Chandeliers hung from chains that seemed to extend into infinity, their crystal fixtures burning with a light that wasn't fire, something colder, bluer, more alive. The architecture was familiar in the way a half-remembered dream is familiar. Gothic, grandiose, designed to make anyone standing beneath it feel the crushing weight of their own insignificance. Harry pushed himself to his knees. His hands, he looked at his hands, they weren't his hands. Haruto Kimura had soft, unremarkable hands, office hands. The hands now pressed against the stone floor were lean and strong, with long fingers and faint silver scars tracing the knuckles. He was wearing armor, not the bulky plate of a warrior, but a fitted coat of deep charcoal leather reinforced with dark metal at the shoulders, forearms, and chest. A high collar framed his jaw. He could feel the weight of a cloak on his back, heavy and rich, dark enough to drink light. He was Harold Ashenbane, not controlling Harold Ashenbane through a screen, being him. No, he whispered, and the voice that came out wasn't his. It was deeper, smoother, carrying an accent he'd chosen from a voice pack 8 years ago because it sounded cool. No, number what, do not move. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a baritone so deep it seemed to resonate in Harry's ribcage. He looked up. The throne room of the great tomb of Nazarick spread before him like a cathedral designed by a madman with unlimited resources and a grudge against modesty. Enormous pillars lined the hall, each carved with figures of demons and angels locked in eternal combat. Banners hung between them, guild banners, dozens of them, each bearing a different crest. And at the far end, elevated on a platform of obsidian steps, sat a throne. On the throne sat death, not metaphorical death, not a man in a costume. An actual undead overlord, a skeleton wrapped in magnificent dark robes that seemed woven from the night sky itself. A staff clutched in one skeletal hand that radiated power so intense Harry could taste it in the back of his throat, like ozone before a lightning strike. 2 points of crimson light burned in the empty sockets of the skull, and they were fixed on Harry with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Ainz Ooal. or rather, the avatar of the guild master of Ainz Ooal. Harry recognized the design instantly. Every serious Yggdrasil player knew what Momonga looked like. The Overlord, the Eclipse-class undead mage. Leader of the guild that had turned the great tomb of Nazarick into the single most fortified player base in the game's history. Flanking the throne, arrayed in a semicircle of terrible beauty, stood figures Harry recognized from wiki pages and forum posts. The floor guardians of Nazarick, a woman in white with horns curving from her temples and golden eyes blazing with possessive fury, Albedo, guardian overseer. Beside her, a demon in an orange suit with a tail and spectacles that did nothing to hide the predatory intelligence behind his eyes, Demiurge. A small girl in dark armor with an enormous battle axe, Shaltir Bloodfallen, though Harry had heard she had a true form that was considerably less cute. Twins, a dark elf boy clutching a staff and a dark elf girl with a whip, both looking at him with wide, curious eyes, Aura and Mare. A massive insectoid figure loomed behind the others, Cossidus, if Harry remembered right, 4 arms, each one holding a weapon that could bisect a building. Every single one of them was staring at him. I said, the skeleton on the throne repeated, and his voice carried the weight of a continent, "Do not move." Harry very wisely did not move. His heart was hammering. He had a heart. He could feel it slamming against his ribs, could feel the blood rushing in his ears, could feel every hair on the back of his neck standing at attention. This was real. Whatever this was, it was real. Albedo, Ainz said, "Yes, my lord." The woman's voice was silk over steel. She stepped forward, and Harry noticed she was holding a weapon, a massive bardach that should have been too heavy for her frame but rested in her grip like it weighed nothing. "Scan him." Albedo's golden eyes narrowed. Something pulsed in the air, a wave of magical energy that washed over Harry like a cold wind. He felt it probe him, felt it push against the boundaries of his avatars, his body's defenses. His resistances activated automatically, a cascade of passive abilities lighting up in his mind like dashboard warnings. The scan hit his outer defenses, pushed through the first layer, hit the second layer, and stopped dead. Albedo's eyes widened, just slightly, just enough. "My lord," she said, and her voice had changed, tighter, more careful. "His defenses are extensive. I cannot read his full status. His level appears to be at the maximum threshold. He possesses at least one world item. I can sense its presence but cannot identify it. His race is..." She paused. "Human." A ripple went through the Guardians. Demiurge's tail twitched. Shaltir's eyes, red, vivid, hungry, locked onto Harry with renewed interest. Cossidus shifted, and the movement of his massive body sent vibrations through the floor. "Human," Ainz repeated. The crimson lights in his eye sockets flickered. Harry's mind was racing. He knew the lore. He knew that in Yggdrasil, human players in Nazarick were enemies. The guild had been formed by heteromorphic players, monsters, undead demons, specifically because human players hunted them. Nazarick was their fortress against a world that hated them, and now a human was kneeling in their throne room. He needed to talk. He needed to say something before that skeleton on the throne decided to erase him. "I'm a player," Harry said. The words landed like a grenade, dead silence. Even the ambient magical hum of the throne room seemed to hold its breath. Ainz leaned forward. The motion was slow, deliberate, and terrifying, the movement of something ancient and vast giving its attention to something small. "What did you say?" "I'm a player." Harry kept his voice steady, which was a miracle given that his heart was trying to escape through his throat. "Yggdrasil, the game. I was in it when the servers shut down. Something happened, some kind of glitch, a tear, and I ended up here, on your floor, which, by the way, I apologize for, wasn't exactly planned." Nothing, no reaction from the skull. The eye lights burned steady and unreadable. Then Ainz raised one skeletal hand, and the Guardians went still in a way that reminded Harry of dogs hearing a command frequency only they could detect. "Leave us." Albedo's head snapped toward the throne. "My lord, all of you, leave the throne room now." "Lord Ainz." Albedo's composure cracked, and beneath it was something raw and desperate. This creature appeared in the heart of Nazarick without warning. He could be an assassin, a spy, Albedo. Ainz didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The name alone carried an authority so absolute it was almost physical. "I will not repeat myself." The Guardian Overseer stared at her master for a long, charged moment. Then she bowed stiffly, furiously, and turned on her heel. One by one, the Guardians followed. Demiurge gave Harry a look that catalogued him like a specimen. Shaltir licked her lips. The twins scurried out with backward glances. Cossidus was last, his massive frame filling the doorway before it sealed shut behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. They were alone. Ainz Ooal, Overlord of Death, Supreme Being of Nazarick, sat on his throne and stared at Harry for what felt like a geological age. Then he slumped. It was subtle, hard to read on a skeleton, but the rigid posture softened, the theatrical menace drained away, and what was left was something that looked remarkably like exhaustion. "You said you're a player," Ainz said. His voice was different now. Still deep, still resonant, the voice was built into the avatar, but the tone had shifted. Less overlord, more tired office worker. "Yeah," Harry said. He was still on his knees. "Can I stand up? The floor's really cold." A pause. Then, incredibly, Ainz chuckled. It was a strange sound from a skeleton, a dry, hollow thing like wind through dead branches, but it was undeniably a laugh. "Stand." Harry stood. His body moved with a fluidity he'd never experienced. Harold Ashenbane was built for grace, for speed, for the kind of precise movement that turned combat into art. Just standing up felt like unwrapping a gift. "Your real name," Ainz said. "Your actual name, not your character." Harry hesitated. This was the test. If Ainz was a player, really a player, not just an NPC who gained sentience or some bizarre game artifact, he'd understand what that question meant. It meant, are you real? Are you like me? Are you a person trapped in a body that isn't yours in a world that shouldn't exist? "Kimura Haruto," Harry said. "I worked in logistics in Chiba. I had a cat named Potato." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with one of Kasadis's swords. "Suzuki Satoru," Ainz said quietly. "Salaryman, Tokyo, no pets, no family left." A beat. "You had a cat named Potato. She was orange and round. It fit." Another laugh. This one was less hollow. Something in it cracked like ice breaking up in spring. "How," Ainz said, and now his voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man holding himself together with both hands. "How are you here? I was alone. When the server shut down, I was sitting on this throne, and the NPCs came to life, and I was alone. I've been alone for," he stopped. "How long has it been since you arrived?" "About 5 minutes ago." For me, it was the server shut down. 23:59 and counting. Then something ripped open in front of me, and I was here. Ainz stood from the throne. He was tall, the avatar had been designed to intimidate, and his robes pooled around his feet like dark water. He descended the obsidian steps slowly, and Harry watched a skeleton try to figure out how to express the emotions of a man who'd been alone for what might have been hours or days in a world that terrified him. "You're really real," Ainz said. He stopped 3 paces from Harry. The crimson eye lights searched Harry's face, his human face, with actual expressions and actual eyes, and something in them flickered. "You're actually a person. Last time I checked," Harry said, "though the jury's still out on whether any of this counts as real or if I'm having some kind of stress-induced breakdown." "I thought the same thing at first." Ainz's jaw bare bone didn't move when he spoke. The voice just emanated, which was deeply unsettling up close. "I pinched myself, then I remembered I don't have skin." Harry stared at him, then he laughed. It burst out of him, loud and genuine and slightly hysterical, bouncing off the cathedral ceiling and echoing through the empty throne room. Ainz watched him laugh, and even though a skeleton couldn't smile, something in his posture suggested he wanted to. "All right," Harry said, catching his breath. "All right, so we're both players. We're both stuck in our avatars in a world that shouldn't exist, surrounded by NPCs that are apparently alive now. What's the situation?" Ainz was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was with the careful precision of someone who'd been thinking very hard about all of this with no one to share it with. "I arrived several hours ago. The server shut down and I was simply here, in my body, my real body, this body." The NPCs activated immediately. They have personalities consistent with their backstories, the ones we wrote for them. They're loyal to me, fanatically so. They believe I am their god. He paused. "I have been operating under the assumption that I am the only player in this world, until you appeared on my floor." "Several hours," Harry said. "So you've been sitting up there on that throne for hours, pretending to be an all-knowing overlord while internally screaming." "I would characterize it as strategically maintaining composure," Ainz said with impressive dignity. "But yes, essentially. And the Guardians, they're real, genuinely alive, as far as I can determine, yes. They have emotions, independent thoughts, desires. They are also catastrophically powerful and unflinchingly loyal to the supreme beings of Ainz Ooal, which currently means me." He paused again. "And which raises an important question about you." Harry read the subtext immediately. "You're wondering what to do with me." "I'm wondering what to do with everything," Ainz said, and the honesty in it was raw enough to sting. "But yes, you specifically, you're in Nazarick. My guardians just saw a human appear in their sanctum. Albedo is probably on the other side of that door planning 7 different ways to kill you, and Demiurge is likely planning 12. I need to give them an explanation, and it needs to be one they accept, or things will become very complicated very quickly." Harry folded his arms. The leather of his coat creaked, actual leather, making actual sounds. "Your options. Option 1, I declare you an intruder and let the Guardians deal with you. This is the easiest path politically, but has the obvious drawback of you being dead. I'd prefer to avoid that one. Option 2, I declare you a prisoner, a useful asset to be studied and contained. This would satisfy the Guardian's suspicion, but it would mean keeping you locked away, and frankly, I don't think my containment facilities could hold a max-level world breaker with a world item. No offense. None taken, actually that's kind of flattering. Option 3, Ainz stop. The eyelights dimmed, then brightened, his equivalent of closing his eyes and opening them, Harry realized. A tell, the Overlord had tells if you knew to look. I tell them the truth, a version of it, that you are a being of supreme power, a warrior of Yggdrasil who was drawn to Nazarick by fate or design, and that I in my infinite wisdom have chosen to recognize you as one of us. Harry's arms dropped to his sides. You're talking about making me a supreme being. I'm talking about survival, mine, yours. Nazarick's Ainz began to pace long, slow strides, his robes whispering against the stone. Think about it, Kimura-san. I am one man, one very confused man, in charge of a tomb full of godlike beings who think I'm omniscient. I am not omniscient. I am a salaryman who played a video game too much. I have been faking my way through every interaction since I arrived, and it is a matter of time before I make a mistake that exposes me. He stopped pacing and faced Harry directly. You are the first real person I've encountered in this world. You may be the only real person in this world. I don't know what's out there. I don't know what threats exist. What I know is that I cannot do this alone, and you are standing in front of me, alive, powerful, and apparently in possession of a sense of humor, which I value more than you realize right now. Harry was quiet. He looked around the throne room, at the banners of a guild he'd never belonged to, at the throne that represented a legacy he had no part in building, at the skeletal figure of a man who was offering him a place in a world that had no place for him. 41 supreme beings, Harry said. That's how many members Ainz Ooal had, 41, all gone. Every one of them stopped playing one by one until it was just me. The way Ainz said it, flat, factual, empty, told Harry everything about the pain underneath. I stayed until the end, and now I'm here. And you want to make me number 42. I want to not be alone. The words came out fast, almost startled, as if Ainz hadn't meant to say them that bluntly. A green aura pulsed around him, his emotional suppression, Harry realized, the passive ability that dampened an undead's feelings when they spiked too high. The aura faded, and Ainz straightened. I also want a strategic ally of immense power who can help me navigate an unknown world while maintaining the stability of an organization full of beings who could casually destroy nations. But primarily the first thing. Harry looked at his hands again. Harold Ashenbane's hands, strong, scarred, capable of channeling enough magical energy to crack the world's spine. He thought about Haruto Kimura's hands, soft, unremarkable, good for typing and nothing else. He thought about the apartment in Chiba and the cat, and the alarm that went off at 6 every morning for a job that paid just enough to keep him numb. That life was gone. Whether this was death or delusion or actual transportation to another world, that life was gone. I have conditions, Harry said. Ainz tilted his skull. Name them. 1. I'm not a figurehead. If I'm a supreme being, I have actual authority. I can give orders, make decisions, and the Guardians listen. Not because they like me, I'm realistic enough to know that'll take time, but because you've made it clear that my word carries weight. Agreed. 2. You and I are honest with each other, completely. I don't care what faces we wear in front of the NPCs, but when it's just us, when the door's closed and nobody's listening, we're Kimura and Suzuki. 2 confused guys figuring this out. No posturing, no manipulation. A longer pause this time, then, agreed, though I reserve the right to occasionally posture, it becomes something of a coping mechanism. Fair. 3. Harry hesitated. This one mattered. I don't know what kind of ruler you're planning to be. I don't know what Nazarick's goals are in this new world, but I won't participate in cruelty for its own sake. If something needs to be destroyed, I'll destroy it. If someone threatens us, I'll end them. But I'm not going to slaughter innocent people because it's convenient. Ainz was silent for a long time. The throne room settled around them, its shadows deep and patient. You're human, Ainz finally said. Yeah. I mean your avatar, your character, you're human. You have a human body, human emotions, human empathy. My emotions are filtered, suppressed. When I feel something too strongly, this body dampens it, flattens it. I can think about terrible things and feel nothing, and that terrifies me in the moments between suppressions. He placed one skeletal hand against his chest, where a heart would be if he had one. You may be the conscience I can no longer fully access, so yes. Condition 3 is agreed, enthusiastically. Harry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then I accept, he said. Supreme Being number 42. Harold Ashenbane. He paused. Do I get a cool title? We'll workshop it. Ainz turned toward the throne room doors. First, we need to present you to the Guardians, and I need you to understand something about them. They'll want to kill me. Some of them, yes. Albedo in particular will view you as a threat to my authority. Demiurge will assume everything I do is part of some grand design which is actually useful. I've been riding that assumption since I arrived. Cocytus will withhold judgment until he sees you fight. Shaltir will want to. He trailed off. What? You're alive, Kimura-san, warm-blooded. In a tomb full of undead and demons and constructs, you are the only living, breathing being of supreme power. Shaltir is a vampire. Draw your own conclusions. Wonderful. The twins, Aura and Mare, are the most likely to accept you openly. They're childlike in many respects, curious and adaptable, but don't underestimate them. Mare once collapsed an entire forest because someone insulted Nazarick. Harry filed that away. So what's the play? Ainz straightened to his full height. The exhausted salaryman vanished, and the Overlord returned, shoulders back, robes settling into dramatic folds, crimson eyelights blazing with renewed intensity. It was like watching someone put on a mask, except the mask was a 10-foot skeleton radiating death magic. Follow me to the doors. Open, say nothing, let me speak first. I will frame your arrival as ordained, part of a greater design. The Guardians trust my judgment implicitly. If I declare you supreme being, they will accept it. They may not like it, but they will accept it. And if they don't, the crimson lights flickered. Then we have larger problems than introductions. Ainz strode toward the doors, and Harry fell into step beside him. Walking in this body was strange. Every movement was fluid, precise, economical. He was aware of his own strength in a way that was almost overwhelming. He could feel the mana flowing through him like a second circulatory system, vast and deep and churning. The void mantle pulsed against his awareness, a world item integrated so deeply into his build that it felt like an extra limb. He was, objectively, one of the most powerful beings in whatever world this was, and he was about to walk into a room full of creatures who wanted him dead. Good times. Ainz raised his hand and the doors swung open. The Guardians were exactly where Harry expected them to be, arranged in the corridor beyond, a wall of beautiful, terrible power. Albedo stood front and center, her bardage planted before her, golden eyes burning. Demiurge was to her left, hands clasped behind his back, a pleasant smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Shaltir hovered to the right, literally, her feet weren't touching the ground. The twins stood together, and Cocytus towered behind them, all like a glacier with swords. Albedo's gaze locked onto Harry with the subtlety of a guided missile. He felt her killing intent wash over him, not a figure of speech, an actual, palpable wave of hostile energy. His resistances absorbed it without effort, but the intent behind it was unmistakable. She wanted him removed from existence. Guardians of Nazarick, Ainz said, and his voice was the thundering decree of a god again, rolling down the corridor like a wave. What has occurred tonight is unprecedented. A being of supreme power, a warrior of Yggdrasil itself, has crossed the void between worlds and been delivered to the heart of our domain. He paused, letting the words settle. Harry watched the Guardians' faces. Demiurge's pleasant smile tightened fractionally. Albedo's jaw clenched. Shaltir tilted her head, red eyes flicking between Ainz and Harry like she was watching a tennis match. I have tested this individual, Ainz continued. I have measured his power, examined his knowledge, and weighed his worth. He is not an enemy, he is not a servant, he is not a curiosity to be studied. Another pause, longer. Harry could feel the tension in the corridor like a physical thing, like the air itself was holding its breath. He is the 42nd supreme being of Ainz Ooal. The silence didn't break, it detonated. Lord Ainz, Albedo surged forward, her composure shattering like glass. The bardage came up, not toward Harry, but clutched to her chest like a lifeline. You cannot. The supreme beings are the founders of Nazarick. They created us. This human cannot simply. Albedo. That voice again, that absolute, inarguable authority. Are you questioning my judgment? The words hit Albedo like a physical blow. She froze mid-step, her face cycling through emotions so fast Harry could barely track them. Fury, anguish, betrayal, and then underneath it all, the bedrock of her existence. Devotion. Unshakable, all-consuming devotion to the being on the throne. Never, my lord, she whispered. She sank to one knee. Forgive me. Demiurge stepped forward. His smile hadn't changed, but his eyes, those crystalline, jeweled eyes, were working overtime, calculating at a speed that was almost visible. Lord Ainz, he said, smooth as silk, might I inquire as to the nature of Lord Harold's arrival? The manner in which he appeared suggested spatial displacement of extraordinary magnitude. Was this foreseen? The question was a trap. Harry could see it. Demiurge wasn't asking for information. He was testing whether Ainz's story was consistent, whether the Overlord truly intended what he claimed. And beneath that, a deeper test. Is this your idea or his? Ainz didn't miss a beat. Demiurge, do you believe anything occurs within the walls of Nazarick without my knowledge? The demon's smile broadened. Something like satisfaction, even delight, flickered across his features. Of course not, my lord, forgive my foolish question. Your foresight, as always, surpasses my limited understanding. Harry kept his face neutral, but internally he was impressed. Ainz had sidestepped the question entirely, answering with a question that implied omniscience without actually claiming anything specific. The salaryman was better at this than he gave himself credit for. Lord Harold, Shaltir drifted forward, her feet still hovering an inch above the ground. She was small, the avatar of a young girl, pale as porcelain, dressed in a ball gown that looked like it was sewn from midnight. Her eyes were the deep, vivid red of arterial blood, and they were fixed on Harry with an intensity that had nothing to do with hostility and everything to do with hunger. "Welcome to Nazarick," she smiled, and her fangs caught the light. "Thank you," Harry said. It was the first thing he'd said in front of the Guardians, and he felt every pair of eyes in the corridor focus on him like spotlights. He kept his voice even, his posture relaxed, not submissive, not aggressive, just present. "It's an impressive place. I look forward to getting to know all of you." Mare, the small dark elf boy clutching his staff with both hands, made a tiny sound. He looked up at his sister with enormous, worried eyes. "Aura, is he really? S.H. Aura elbowed him. She was studying Harry with open curiosity. No hostility, no calculation, just the straightforward interest of someone encountering something new. "If Lord Ainz says he's a supreme being, then he's a supreme being. Right, Lord Ainz?" "That is correct, Aura." "Then welcome." She grinned at Harry, and it was so genuinely, disarmingly bright that he almost smiled back. Almost. He was acutely aware that showing warmth too quickly would read as weakness to Albedo and Demiurge. So he gave Aura a nod, respectful, measured, and she seemed satisfied. Cocytus spoke. His voice was deep and chitinous, each word precisely articulated. "Lord Harold, I would request the honor of witnessing your combat abilities at your earliest convenience." "Granted," Harry said. "Name the time." Something shifted in Cocytus's bearing. Not warmth, the insect warrior didn't seem built for warmth, but respect. The willingness to fight, to be measured by combat rather than words, meant something to him. He bowed his massive head and stepped back. Ainz raised his hand. "Albedo, you will prepare quarters for Lord Harold on the 9th floor, adjacent to my own chambers. He is to have full access to all facilities, resources, and intelligence within Nazarick. His authority is second only to mine. Is that understood?" Albedo rose from her knee. Her face was a mask, beautiful, serene, and absolutely lethal. "Understood, my lord, it shall be done." She turned and walked away without looking at Harry. The air temperature in her wake dropped a noticeable degree. "Demiurge, you will brief Lord Harold on our current understanding of the world beyond Nazarick tomorrow morning. Hold nothing back." "With pleasure, my lord." Demiurge bowed, and his smile was the smile of a fox who'd just been told the henhouse was unlocked. He left with measured, elegant steps. Shaltir lingered. She drifted closer to Harry, close enough that he could smell her. She smelled like night-blooming flowers and something underneath that was older, colder, and hungrier. "Lord Harold," she murmured, "if you need anything, anything at all during the night, my chambers are on the 1st floor. I do so enjoy." "Entertaining, I'll keep that in mind," Harry said neutrally. Shaltir laughed, a delicate musical sound with razors hidden in it, and floated away. The twins departed together, Mare casting one last wide-eyed glance over his shoulder. Cocytus followed, and then they were alone again. Ainz and Harry standing in the corridor of the great tomb of Nazarick, surrounded by the silence of a world that was still deciding what it wanted to be. Ainz's shoulders sagged. That could have gone worse. "Albedo wants me dead. Albedo wants anyone who threatens my position dead. Don't take it personally." A pause. "Actually, do take it personally. She's extremely dangerous. Demiurge thinks this is all part of your master plan." "Yes, and that assumption is doing 90% of the heavy lifting in my administration. If he ever figures out that I'm improvising, we're both finished." Harry rubbed the back of his neck. Even that gesture felt different. The muscles were lean and taut, the skin unmarked by the tension knots that had plagued Haruto Kimura since his 20s. "Where do we actually stand? Big picture, what do you know about this world?" "Almost nothing." Ainz began walking, and Harry fell into step beside him. The corridors of the 9th floor were vast and ornate, every surface carved or gilded or enchanted. We are on a large landmass. There's a human kingdom nearby, possibly several. The locals have magic, but from what I've been able to sense, it's primitive, nothing compared to Yggdrasil abilities. I haven't made contact with anyone outside Nazarick yet. So we're a superpower sitting in the middle of territory we don't understand, surrounded by civilizations we know nothing about, with no intelligence network and no diplomatic relations. That about sums it up. Great, this is fine, everything's fine. They walked in silence for a while. The corridors shifted around them. Nazarick was a dungeon, and it moved subtly, like a living thing adjusting to accommodate its masters. Doors appeared where Harry expected them. Hallways shortened when he needed to turn. The tomb itself was welcoming him, and the realization sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with temperature. Ainz stopped at a balcony. Harry hadn't known Nazarick had balconies in the game. The tomb was entirely underground, but this balcony opened onto the surface, and beyond it lay the new world. Harry stepped out and looked. The sky was vast and dark, dusted with stars that were arranged in constellations he didn't recognize. 2 moons hung above the horizon, one silver, one faintly blue, and their combined light painted the landscape in shades of pearl and shadow. A grassland stretched endlessly in every direction, broken by distant tree lines and the faint silver thread of a river. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of earth and growing things, and it filled Harry's lungs like something he'd been starving for without knowing it. He gripped the balcony railing. The stone was real under his fingers. The wind was real on his face. The moons were real, and the stars, and the dark line of the horizon, and the soft sound of insects in the grass far below. "It's beautiful," he said. Ainz came to stand beside him. The Overlord looked out at the world, his world now, whether he'd asked for it or not, and the crimson lights in his eye sockets dimmed to a gentle, steady glow. "I was going to say terrifying," Ainz said. "Both," Harry agreed. "It's both." They stood there for a long time, the skeleton and the human, looking out at a world that had no idea what had just arrived on its doorstep. Behind them, the great tomb of Nazarick hummed with power and purpose, its guardians already scheming, adjusting, preparing for a future that had changed shape in a single night. Below the balcony, the grassland swayed in the wind like a dark ocean, and somewhere in the distance, a light flickered, a campfire maybe, or a lantern in a window. Someone living their small, ordinary life, utterly unaware that 2 gods were watching from the darkness. Harry took a deep breath. He was alive. He was powerful. He was standing on the edge of the unknown with a skeleton who'd been a salaryman in a tomb full of monsters who might eventually accept him. "Suzuki-san," he said quietly. "Thank you for not killing me. Thank you for not making me regret it." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled, low and deep, like the world itself clearing its throat. "So," Harry said, "what do we do tomorrow?" "Everything," Ainz said. "We do everything." The 2 moons climbed higher, and the night settled over Nazarick like a cloak, and in the silence between words something new took root, fragile, uncertain, and stubborn as weeds. Something that might, given time and luck in the absence of mutual annihilation, grow into trust, but that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight they watched the stars. Chapter 2, Weight of the Crown. Harry woke up and for 3 full seconds had no idea where he was. The ceiling was wrong. It wasn't the water-stained plaster of his Chiba apartment, with the crack that had been spreading toward the light fixture for 2 years. It was black marble, polished to a mirror sheen, carved with patterns that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. The bed beneath him was enormous, a 4-poster monstrosity draped in silk the color of deep wine, with mattresses so soft he'd sunk into them like quicksand. The sheets smelled like something that didn't exist in Japan. Something old and clean and faintly sweet, like a forest after rain mixed with the ghost of a library. Then memory hit him like a freight train, and he sat bolt upright. Nazarick, Yggdrasil. The skeleton on the throne, supreme being number 42. "Right," he said to the empty room. "That." He swung his legs out of bed and looked down at himself, still Harold Ashenbane, still the lean, battle-scarred body wrapped in the underlayer of his combat gear. He'd slept in it, too paranoid to change, too exhausted to care. His mana hummed beneath his skin like a second heartbeat, steady and enormous. The void mantle rested in his awareness, a constant pressure, like holding a live coal that didn't burn. The quarters Albedo had prepared were excessive. The bedroom alone was the size of his entire Chiba apartment. Beyond it, through an archway, he could see a sitting room with furniture that belonged in a museum, shelves lined with books he couldn't read, and a fireplace that burned with blue flames that gave off warmth but no smoke. A second archway led to what appeared to be a private bath carved from a single block of dark stone, already filled with steaming water that rippled faintly despite the absence of any visible source. Nazarick took care of its masters. The tomb was alive in ways he was still processing, not sentient exactly, but responsive, anticipatory. It had known he wanted water before he'd consciously thought about being thirsty. A crystal glass had appeared on his bedside table at some point during the night, filled with water so pure it was almost luminous. He drank it. It was the best water he'd ever tasted. A knock at the door, precise, controlled. The kind of knock that communicated, "I am being polite, but I do not require your permission." Harry set the glass down. "Come in." The door opened and a maid entered. She was beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful, elegant, purposeful, and designed to cut. Her uniform was immaculate. Black dress, white apron, a headpiece that framed dark hair pulled back with ruthless precision. Her eyes were flat and professional, and she moved with the mechanical grace of someone who had been built, literally built, for service. "Lord Harold," she said. Her voice carried no warmth and no coldness, pure function. "I am Ooal Alpha, Vice Captain of the Pleiades Combat Maids. I have been assigned as your attendant for the morning. Lord Ainz requests your presence in the conference chamber on the 9th floor at your earliest convenience. Lord Demiurge will be providing a strategic briefing." "Thank you, Yuri, give me 10 minutes. She bowed and retreated, closing the door with a click that was somehow both deferential and judgmental. Harry got the distinct impression she hadn't decided what to make of him yet. He could live with that. Uncertainty was better than hostility. He washed quickly. The bath was ridiculous. The water apparently enchanted to clean, rejuvenate, and lightly buff all physical stats for an hour, because of course it was, and dressed in full gear. The charcoal leather coat, the reinforced armor, the dark cloak that pooled around his boots. He caught his reflection in a mirror and paused. Harold Ashenbane stared back at him. Lean face with sharp features, a jaw that could cut glass, eyes that were an unnatural shade of gray, steel gray, storm gray, the gray of a sky about to unleash something biblical. His hair was dark and fell to his collar, pushed back carelessly. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, cosmetic, chosen for aesthetics, but real now. He looked like someone who had been designed to be dangerous and was entirely comfortable with that fact. This is me now, Harry thought, might as well own it. He left the quarters and found Ooal Alpha waiting in the corridor, hands folded, posture perfect. "Lead the way." The 9th floor of Nazarick was the domain of the Supreme Beings, the most heavily fortified, most opulently furnished, and most restricted level of the entire tomb. Harry followed Yuri through corridors that shifted subtly to accommodate their path, past doors that whispered with contained magic, past alcoves displaying artifacts and trophies from Yggdrasil's history. Every surface screamed power. Every shadow concealed something watchful. They passed a pair of Nazarick's regular maids, homunculus servants, blank-faced and efficient, who stopped, pressed themselves against the wall, and bowed so deeply their foreheads nearly touched the floor. "Supreme Being," they murmured in unison. Harry nodded to them and kept walking. The title sat on his shoulders like a physical weight, but he kept his spine straight and his pace steady. These beings, maids, guardians, every creature in this tomb, lived and died by the authority of their masters. Showing uncertainty wouldn't earn their respect, it would terrify them. The conference chamber was a circular room dominated by a massive table carved from a single piece of obsidian. Maps covered its surface, hand-drawn, exquisitely detailed, and largely incomplete. The known world, apparently, was still mostly unknown. Ainz was already seated at the head of the table, his skeletal frame draped in robes of state, the staff of Ainz Ooal gown resting against the wall behind him. He looked up when Harry entered, and the crimson eyelights flickered in what Harry was beginning to recognize as a greeting. "Good morning, Lord Harold, Lord Ainz." They were performing, they both knew it, but Demiurge was already present, standing at attention beside the table with his hands clasped behind his back, and the performance was for him. "Lord Harold," Demiurge said, and his bow was precise, deep enough for respect, shallow enough to retain dignity. The demon straightened and adjusted his spectacles with one gloved finger. "I trust your quarters were satisfactory." "More than satisfactory, thank you, Demiurge." The demon smiled. It was the kind of smile that made you want to check your pockets. "Excellent. Then with your permission and Lord Ainz's, I shall begin the briefing." Ainz gestured. Demiurge moved to the table and began. He was, Harry realized within the first 2 minutes, a genius. Not a game genius, not a scripted NPC delivering pre-written dialogue. A genuine strategic intellect, sharp as a scalpel and twice as precise. His analysis of Nazarick's position was brutal in its clarity. They were located on a plain southwest of the Riesti's kingdom, a feudal human nation with a weak king, a corrupt nobility, and a military that would be irrelevant in any conflict with Nazarick. To the south lay the Baharuth Empire, more organized, more militaristic, ruled by an emperor called Jerkniv, who was apparently competent enough to be interesting. East of both nations sat the slain theocracy, a religious state devoted to the 6 great gods, beings who, Demiurge noted with clinical interest, appeared to have been Yggdrasil players who'd arrived in this world centuries ago. "Players," Harry said sharply. "So it would seem, Lord Harold. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. The theocracy possesses artifacts consistent with Yggdrasil technology, and their founding mythology describes beings with abilities far beyond this world's native magic system." Harry looked at Ainz. The Overlord met his gaze and gave an almost imperceptible nod. They discussed this privately later. Demiurge continued. Beyond the three major human nations, the landscape fractured into smaller territories, demi-human kingdoms, tribal lands, dark forests teeming with monsters, and vast unexplored regions where anything might lurk. The local magic system maxed out around what Yggdrasil would consider Tier 6, with a handful of legendary figures capable of Tier 7. Nazarick's forces operated at Tier 10 and above. In summary, Demiurge said, Nazarick exists in a world of insects. He paused. Useful insects in some cases. Insects that can be organized, directed, and employed, but insects nonetheless. Don't underestimate insects, Harry said. Enough ants can strip a dragon to bone. Demiurge tilted his head. Behind his spectacles, something recalculated. A surprisingly astute observation, Lord Harold. You suggest that numerical superiority, however individually negligible, could pose a threat through attrition. I suggest that we don't know what we don't know. Those players who founded the theocracy, they're dead now, right? Something killed them. Either time or each other or something in this world we haven't accounted for. Until we understand what that was, we treat everything outside these walls as a variable. Silence. Demiurge's tail swished behind him, a rapid, almost excited motion. His smile broadened. Lord Ainz, the demon said, turning to the throne with something approaching reverence, your choice of the 42nd Supreme Being continues to demonstrate the depths of your foresight. Lord Harold's strategic instincts are, as I expected, Ainz said smoothly, and Harry had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from grinning. The salaryman was getting better at this. The briefing lasted another hour. Demiurge laid out intelligence gathered by Nazarick's shadow demons, insubstantial scouts deployed through the surrounding region, trade routes, military positions, population centers, political tensions. The Riesti's kingdom was rotting from within, its nobility more interested in power games than governance. The empire was consolidating, the theocracy was watching. When Demiurge finished, Ainz dismissed him with instructions to prepare a more detailed intelligence package. The demon bowed to both of them, the bow to Harry fractionally deeper than it had been at the start of the briefing, and departed. The door closed. Ainz's posture collapsed. He's terrifying, Ainz said in his normal voice. Every time I talk to him, I feel like I'm taking a final exam I haven't studied for. He thinks I'm a genius, Kimura-san. He thinks everything I do is calculated 12 moves ahead. I'm one move ahead on a good day. Harry dropped into a chair across from Ainz. You're doing better than you think. That line about as I expected. Perfect. He ate it up. It's the only line I have. I've been using it for everything. The green aura of emotional suppression flickered around Ainz and faded. Yesterday, Mayor brought me a report about soil composition near Nazarick. Soil. I know nothing about soil. I said as expected, and he looked at me like I'd revealed the secrets of the universe. Harry laughed. He couldn't help it. The absurdity of it, a skeleton overlord running the most powerful organization in the world on pure bluff, was too good. All right, Harry said, pulling himself together. Serious question. The theocracy. Players founded it. Yes, and players apparently brought world items with them. Demiurge's intelligence suggests at least one, possibly the downfall of Castle and Country, a mind control type world item. If the theocracy has that and decides we're a threat, then we need to know what we're dealing with before they know what they're dealing with. Priority 1, intelligence. We need eyes inside the theocracy. Priority 2, deterrence. We need to establish ourselves as something they can't afford to provoke. Ainz nodded slowly. I've been thinking along similar lines, but there's a more immediate problem. What? The Guardians. Ainz laced his skeletal fingers together. They're loyal to me, fanatically, but you are an unknown. Albedo is managing barely. She'll follow my orders, but she's watching you for any sign of weakness or disloyalty. Demiurge is impressed, which makes him curious, which makes him dangerous. And the others? Cocytus wants to see me fight. Cocytus needs to see you fight. Among the warrior-type Guardians, strength is legitimacy. Until you demonstrate what you can do, you're an unproven quantity, and that makes every Guardian who values combat uncomfortable. Harry leaned back in his chair. Then let's give them a demonstration. What did you have in mind? Something's going to threaten Nazarick eventually. When it does, I handle it, publicly. No tricks, no delegation, no standing in the back giving orders while someone else does the work. I go out, I deal with it, and every Guardian who's watching sees exactly what a world breaker does. And if nothing threatens Nazarick, Suzuki-san. We're a superpower that just appeared in the middle of contested territory. Something will threaten Nazarick. Give it a day. It took less than a day. The alarm reached the 9th floor at mid-afternoon, a pulse of magical energy that reverberated through Nazarick's corridors like a heartbeat. Harry felt it in his teeth, a vibration that carried urgency and direction. East, surface level. Something was coming from the east. He was on his feet and moving before the pulse faded. The corridors of Nazarick responded to his intent, straightening, shortening, clearing a path toward the surface with an eagerness that was almost canine. He passed maids who pressed against walls, past lesser undead who knelt in shadowed alcoves, and reached the surface entrance in under 3 minutes. The great tomb of Nazarick sat in the center of a vast plain, its surface entrance concealed within a hill that looked natural until you noticed the too-perfect symmetry. Around the entrance, a perimeter had been established, Nazarick's outer defenses, manned by undead sentries and magical constructs that patrolled with clockwork precision. Ainz was already there. He stood at the perimeter's edge, his robes stirring in a wind that seemed to exist only for dramatic effect, the staff of Ainz Ooal gown casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. Beside him stood Albedo in her full battle form, black armor, wings spread, bardage gleaming, and Demiurge, whose pleasant smile had been replaced by something colder and more focused. "Report," Harry said as he reached them. Ainz turned, a horde coming from the eastern forest. Demiurge, the demon, produced what appeared to be a magical scroll that unrolled in midair, displaying a real-time image of the approaching threat. Harry looked at it and felt his eyebrows climb. The eastern tree line was moving. Not the trees, the space between them. Hundreds of creatures were pouring from the forest in a disorganized but massive wave. Harry could make out individual shapes, hulking ogres, packs of dire wolves, lumbering trolls, and at the center of the swarm something larger, much larger. A creature that rose above the tree line, its head a twisted mass of horns and teeth, its body covered in scales the color of dried blood. It walked on 4 legs, each one thick as a siege tower, and with every step the ground shuddered. "What is that?" Harry asked, pointing at the big one. "A grand catastrophe, Dragon Lord." Demiurge's tone carried a note of academic interest, like a biologist observing a particularly unusual specimen, native to this world. "They're not true dragon lords, those are far rarer and more dangerous, but they possess wild magic, a power system unique to this world's draconic beings. This one appears to be driving the lesser creatures before it as a living shield. Threat assessment, to Nazarick, negligible. The horde could batter itself against our defenses for a century and accomplish nothing. The dragon itself might reach Tier 8 equivalents, formidable by this world's standards, but well within the capacity of any floor guardian." Demiurge paused. "However, the timing is notable. This is not natural migration behavior. Something has driven these creatures toward us. Whether by coincidence or design, I cannot yet determine." Harry looked at Ainz. The Overlord's eyelights met his, and in that wordless exchange they reached the same conclusion. This was the opportunity they discussed that morning, a gift-wrapped chance for Harry to prove himself in front of the Guardians. "I'll handle it," Harry said. Albedo's head snapped toward him. "Lord Ainz's safety. Lord Ainz isn't going anywhere near that horde," Harry said, not looking at her. "He's staying here behind the perimeter where nothing on that field could touch him even if it tried. I'll deal with the threat, alone." "Alone?" Albedo's voice dripped with contempt. "Against a dragon and hundreds of Albedo." Ainz's voice was quiet, final. "Lord Harold has spoken, let him work." The Guardian Overseer's mouth closed with an audible click of teeth. Her golden eyes blazed, but she bowed her head and stepped back. Harry walked past the perimeter. The plain stretched before him, flat and open, the grass rippling in the breeze. In the distance, the horde churned toward him, a dark stain spreading across the green, the thunder of hundreds of feet and claws and hooves building like an approaching storm. The dragon's roar split the air, a sound that carried wild magic in its resonance, a sound designed to break wills and scatter courage. Harry felt it wash over him, felt the magic try to grip his mind, try to inject fear and submission into his thoughts. His passive resistances caught it, dismantled it, fed the raw magical energy into his reserves like kindling into a furnace. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and smiled. Behind him, invisible but undoubtedly present, he knew Ainz was watching through scrying magic. He knew the Guardians were watching. This was the audition, the proof. The moment where Harold Ashenbane stopped being a name and became something they'd never forget. The horde was close enough now that he could see individual faces, the tusked snarls of ogres, the yellow eyes of wolves, the dull rage of trolls charging forward with clubs raised. They were afraid of the dragon behind them and running toward a target they didn't understand. Cannon fodder, tragic in a way, animals driven by a bigger predator. Harry raised his right hand. In Yggdrasil, the World Breaker class had been built around a single concept, magical supremacy, not specialization in any school. Not mastery of any element, supremacy. The ability to treat all magic as a universal language that the World Breaker spoke fluently and everything else only stuttered through. Where other casters had spell lists, a world breaker had a library, every spell they'd ever witnessed, absorbed, or analyzed, stored in perfect fidelity, available for instant deployment at amplified power. Harry had played Yggdrasil for 12 years. He had witnessed a lot of spells. He chose one now, not the biggest, not the flashiest, just the most appropriate: Cascade Ruin. The spell manifested not from his hand but from the air itself, a ripple that started small, a shimmer barely visible against the afternoon sky, and then expanded. The ripple became a wave, the wave became a wall. A curtain of raw destructive force, silver-white, crackling with contained devastation, swept across the plain in a perfect arc, moving from Harry's position outward at the speed of sound. It hit the leading edge of the horde. The ogres didn't have time to scream. The wave passed through them and they simply ceased, not exploded, not disintegrated, just erased, their matter converted to energy that the spell absorbed and used to fuel its continued expansion. The wolves vanished mid-stride. The trolls, creatures famous for their regeneration, for their ability to regrow from almost anything, were unmade so completely that there was nothing left to regenerate. The wave carved through the horde like a hot wire through wax. 300 meters of charging monsters reduced to empty air in the space of a held breath. The spell reached the middle of the horde and kept going, kept growing, fed by every life it consumed, each death making it stronger. Behind Harry, silence, absolute, total, stunned silence. The grand catastrophe Dragon Lord saw the wave coming. To its credit, it didn't try to run. The beast was old and powerful and proud, and it reared up on its hind legs, spread its wings, each one the size of a galleon's sail, and opened its maw. Wild magic erupted from its throat in a torrent of primal energy, a beam of concentrated force that existed outside Yggdrasil's tiered system, raw and ancient and potent. The dragon's breath hit the Cascade Ruin. For one heartbeat, the two forces met. The wild magic pushed against the spell, and the spell pushed back, and the point of contact blazed so bright that the shadows across the plain reversed direction. Then Harry clenched his fist. Spell sovereignty. The capstone ability of the World Breaker class. Every magical effect within his domain, and his domain was wherever he decided it was, answered to him. Not just his own spells, all magic. The dragon's wild magic was different from Yggdrasil's system, yes. It was older, stranger, built on different foundations, but it was still magic. And magic, in the presence of a world breaker, did as it was told. The wild magic beam stopped, hung in the air. And then, like a river changing course, it reversed, flowing backward into the Cascade Ruin, feeding it, supercharging it with an energy type the spell had never been designed to contain, but that the void mantle converted seamlessly into raw power. The amplified Cascade Ruin hit the dragon like the fist of a god. The beast's scales, each one thick enough to stop a ballista bolt, peeled away in layers. Its flesh followed. Then its bones, the grand catastrophe Dragon Lord, a creature that had terrorized this region for centuries, came apart in 3 seconds. Not violently, almost gently. Layer by layer it was undone, its matter and magic absorbed into a spell that was now so overfed with energy it had begun to glow like a second sun. Harry opened his fist. Dissolve. The spell collapsed. The light died. The energy dispersed into the atmosphere in a harmless wash of warmth that rustled the grass and stirred the dust. The plain was empty. Where a horde of several hundred monsters and a dragon had been, there was now nothing but flattened grass and a silence so profound it had texture. Not a body, not a bone. Not a drop of blood. The threat had been removed from existence so completely that the land itself seemed confused by the absence. Harry lowered his hand, turned around, walked back toward the perimeter. The guardians were arranged in a line, and their faces told him everything he needed to know. Cocytus stood rigid, all 4 arms locked at his sides, his compound eyes fixed on Harry with an intensity that bordered on religious. The warrior had wanted to see combat. He had seen something else entirely. He had seen a man walk onto a battlefield and erase it. Aura's mouth was hanging open. Mare was clutching his staff so hard his knuckles had gone white, his enormous eyes shimmering with something between terror and awe. Demiurge hadn't moved, hadn't breathed if demons breathed. His spectacles reflected the fading light of the dispersed spell, and behind them his eyes burned with a fervor that was almost fanatical. His tail was stock still, the first time Harry had seen it stop moving. Shaltir was pressing both hands against her chest, her lips parted, her fangs fully extended. Her eyes were wide and glazed and hungry, and the sound she was making was barely audible, a low, trembling keen that could have been fear or desire or both. Albedo. Harry met Albedo's gaze directly. The guardian overseer stood like a statue, her bardage forgotten at her side, her golden eyes locked on him with an expression he couldn't fully read. It wasn't hatred anymore, it wasn't suspicion. It was something rawer, the look of a woman whose worldview had just been shaken at its foundations, who was staring at something that didn't fit into the categories she'd built her existence around. Harry stopped in front of them. He kept his breathing even, his posture relaxed, as if he'd done nothing more strenuous than take a walk. "The threat is handled," he said. "Demiurge, you mentioned the timing was suspicious. I agree. Something drove that horde toward us deliberately. I want to know what. Send scouts to the eastern forest. Deep scouts, shadow demons, not surface patrols. Whatever spooked those creatures, I want it identified before it tries again." Demiurge blinked once. Then the smile returned, not the calculating smile, not the polite smile. A genuine smile, fierce and sharp and alive. "At once, Lord Harold," he said, and bowed deeper than he ever had before. He departed at speed, his tail swishing with barely contained energy. "Cositus," Harry said, "review the perimeter defenses. If a horde that size can approach from the east without earlier detection, there's a gap in our coverage. Find it." "Fix it at once, Lord Harold." The insect warrior's voice carried something new, a warmth, a weight that hadn't been there before. He bowed his massive head and strode away with purpose. "Ora Mare, I need a topographic survey of the surrounding terrain, 5-mile radius minimum. I want to know every hill, valley, river, and tree line. Can you handle that?" Ora snapped to attention, her earlier awe channeled into enthusiasm. "Absolutely, Lord Harold. Mare, come on." She grabbed her brother's arm and dragged him away. Mare stumbled after her, casting one last wide-eyed look at Harry before they disappeared. Shaltir drifted closer. "Lord Harold," she breathed, "that was the most magnificent display of power I have ever witnessed. The way you simply—" She shivered, actually shivered. "If you ever require someone to stand beside you in battle, I would be honored." "I'll remember that, Shaltir, thank you." She floated away, trailing a sound that might have been a sigh or might have been a purr that left albedo. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The bardage hung at her side like a forgotten prop, and her golden eyes were still fixed on Harry with that unreadable expression. Harry waited. "You could have destroyed Nazarick," albedo said finally. Her voice was quiet, not angry, not accusatory, just factual processing. "When you arrived. Had the power, you could have struck before any of us reacted." "I could have," Harry agreed, "but I didn't." "Why?" "Because I don't want to destroy anything, I want to build something, and I can't do that alone any more than Lord Ainz can." Albedo's jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes, a war between programming and experience, between the devotion that defined her existence and the evidence she just witnessed. "I do not trust you," she said. "I know. I may never trust you." "That's your right, but I will follow Lord Ainz's command. And Lord Ainz has named you Supreme Being." She straightened, and the mask of the Guardian Overseer settled back into place, beautiful, composed, lethal. "Your orders will be carried out, your quarters will be maintained, your authority will be respected." She paused. "But know that I am watching you, Lord Harold, every moment, every decision, every breath." "I'd be worried if you weren't," Harry said. "A guardian who didn't protect her master would be failing her duty." "Your vigilance isn't an insult, albedo. It's exactly what Lord Ainz deserves." Something flickered in her golden eyes, the faintest crack in the mask. Then she turned and walked away, her armored boots ringing against the stone with the precise rhythm of a funeral march. Harry stood alone at the perimeter, looking out over the empty plain where a horde had been minutes ago. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. His hands weren't shaking. His heartbeat was steady. He'd just killed hundreds of living creatures, not pixels, not data, living things, and he felt. He didn't know what he felt. There was a hollowness there, a space where an emotion should be that hadn't arrived yet. The ogres had been real. The wolves had been real. Even the dragon, old, powerful, maybe intelligent, had been real. And he'd erased them like chalk from a blackboard. Is this what it's going to be? He thought. Is this what power means in a real world? He pushed the thought down. Not away, he wasn't going to ignore it, but down into the place where things waited to be dealt with when there was time. Right now there was work to do. He turned and went back inside. Ainz was waiting in the corridor just inside the entrance, alone, leaning against a wall in a pose that was so distinctly un-Overlord that Harry almost laughed. The skeleton had his arms crossed and his skull tilted to one side, eyelights dim, the posture of a man who'd been watching something incredible on television and was still processing it. "So," Ainz said, that happened. You erased a dragon." "I did, and then absorbed its magic." "Yeah, and then gave my guardians orders like you'd been doing it for years." Seemed like the moment. Ainz was quiet for a beat. "Then, Kimura-san, when I offered to make you a supreme being, I was operating on the assumption that you were roughly equivalent to me in power. A max-level player. Strong, yes, but within a range I understood." The eye lights brightened. "You are not within a range I understand." Harry leaned against the opposite wall. They stood facing each other in the empty corridor, two men in borrowed bodies, and for a moment the masks were completely off. "The World Breaker class was broken," Harry said. That's not a euphemism. The devs acknowledged it. It was a hidden prestige class buried in a chain of quests so absurdly difficult that only 3 players ever completed it. The class itself multiplied every magical ability by a factor that scaled with exposure. The more spells you witnessed, the stronger you got. I played for 12 years, Suzuki-san. I watched everything. Raid bosses, PvP tournaments, guild wars, world events. Every spell I saw, my class cataloged and converted into ammunition. And the Void Mantle makes it worse or better depending on your perspective. The mantle is a world item that removes type restrictions. Normally, even a world breaker can only copy and redirect spells from compatible magic systems. The mantle eliminates compatibility checks. Any magic, any system, if it exists, I can eat it. Ainz processed this. The green aura of emotional suppression flickered around him. Whatever he was feeling had spiked high enough to trigger the dampener. So when the dragon used wild magic, a system completely foreign to Yggdrasil, didn't matter. Magic is magic. The mantle translates and I consume. You're not a player, Ainz said slowly. You're a weapon, the kind of weapon that other weapons are afraid of. I'm a guy from Chiba who played too many video games and happened to stumble into a class that nobody else wanted to grind for because the quest chain required you to solo a level 95 dungeon naked. Literally naked, no gear, no items, just base stats and whatever spells you'd absorbed up to that point. And you did this. I was very bored and very determined. Took me 3 months of attempts. Ainz unfolded his arms. He stepped closer and his voice dropped. I need to tell you something. And I need you to understand why I'm telling you. Go ahead. When I watched you walk out onto that field, my emotional suppression triggered. Not from fear of the Horde, from fear that you were about to demonstrate something I couldn't match. And when you turned that dragon's magic against itself, it triggered again. He placed a skeletal hand against his chest. I am relieved you are my ally, Kimura-san. Genuinely, profoundly relieved. And I am being honest about this because of our agreement, complete honesty in private. So here is my honest assessment. If you ever decided to turn against Nazarick, I am not certain I could stop you. The words hung between them, heavy and bare. Harry looked at the skeleton standing in front of him, the man who'd spent years watching his friends leave, who'd sat alone on a throne in an empty guild hall waiting for a game to die, who'd woken up in a nightmare dressed as a god and decided to keep going anyway. He thought about what it must have cost Ainz to say that, to admit vulnerability, to hand someone a weapon and trust them not to use it. You won't need to stop me, Harry said, because I'm not going to turn. Not today, not tomorrow, not when things get hard. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have again, a place, a purpose, people who need me to be more than a salaryman who's good at video game. I'm not going to betray that, not for power, not for fear, not for anything. He paused. And if you ever doubt that, you ask me, you don't scheme, you don't test me through the Guardians, you don't set traps, you look me in the eye and ask, deal. The green aura flickered, faded. In the silence that followed Ainz Ooal, Suzuki Satoru stood very still and the crimson lights in his eye sockets glowed with something that might have been warmth. Deal, he said. They stood there for a moment longer. Then Ainz straightened and the Overlord reassembled itself, robes settling, posture squaring, the aura of terrible majesty clicking back into place like armor. We should discuss the Eastern Forest situation if something drove that horde toward us. Agreed, war room, but first Harry held up a finger. When's the last time you ate, or do you eat? Can skeletons eat? I don't require food. The undead body doesn't hunger. A pause. I miss it though, eating, the taste of things. Well, I'm human, so I definitely need food. Is there a kitchen in this tomb? Nazarick has several kitchens. The head chef is an undead who has never tasted food, but is reportedly an extraordinary cook. I haven't confirmed this because I also can't taste food. That's the saddest thing you've told me, and you've told me some sad things. They walked together toward the war room, and the conversation shifted from personal to tactical with the ease of two people who were learning each other's rhythms. The horde wasn't random, they both felt it. Something had pushed those creatures toward Nazarick, a test, a provocation, a side effect of some larger event they hadn't detected. The war room, a different chamber from the morning's conference room, this one deeper in the 9th floor, lined with magical displays that projected real-time information from Nazarick's sensor network, was occupied when they arrived. Demiurge stood at the central display, and beside him, unexpectedly, was Albedo. The Guardian Overseer had shed her battle armor and returned to her white dress, though the Bardich still leaned against the wall within arm's reach. She and Demiurge were studying a projection together, speaking in low voices that ceased the moment Ainz and Harry entered. Report, Ainz said, settling into the command chair at the head of the room. Demiurge stepped forward. His earlier enthusiasm had been tempered by something more serious. My lord, Lord Harold. The shadow demons dispatched to the eastern forest have returned with initial findings. He gestured, and the central display shifted to show an aerial view of the forest, dense, dark, old-growth woodland that stretched for miles. At the forest's center, they discovered evidence of a large-scale magical disturbance. The trees in a half-mile radius have been killed, not burned, not cut, killed. Their life energy was drained entirely, leaving only husks. The soil itself has been rendered sterile. At the epicenter, the display zoomed in, and Harry's eyes narrowed. A circle had been carved into the earth, not by tools, by magic. Symbols lined its circumference, intricate and alien, glowing with a faint residual energy that the shadow demon's sensors registered as neither Yggdrasil-type magic nor the wild magic Demiurge had briefed them about that morning. A third system, Harry said, so it would appear. Demiurge's tail was completely still again. The circle appears to be a summoning or transportation construct. The energy signature is fading but detectable. Whatever or whoever used this circle arrived in this world through it, and the magical backlash from the arrival is what drove the forest creatures into a frenzy. The horde wasn't directed at Nazarick, it was fleeing from the arrival point. The room was very quiet. Something else came through, Harry said. Something from another world. Or from Yggdrasil, Ainz said, and his voice carried a weight that pressed the air flat. They looked at each other. Another player, another guild, something worse. The circle's design didn't match any Yggdrasil teleportation magic Harry had ever seen, but the void mantle was pulsing in his awareness, agitated, responding to the trace energy in the display as if recognizing a distant cousin. Demiurge, Harry said, how old is this circle? Based on the rate of energy decay, the shadow demons estimate the arrival occurred approximately 6 to 8 hours before the horde reached our perimeter. So whatever came through has had most of a day to move, orient itself, and disappear. Harry turned to Ainz. We need to find it before it finds us. Ainz nodded. Agreed. Demiurge, expand the scout network. Triple the shadow demon deployment in the eastern forest and establish a surveillance perimeter at the circle's location. Nothing approaches or leaves that site without our knowledge. Albedo, I will place Nazarick's defenses on heightened alert, Albedo said before Ainz could finish. Her voice was crisp, professional. All floor guardians will be briefed within the hour. Patrol rotations will be increased. Shall I mobilize the Pleiades? Do it, Ainz said. And I want detailed analysis of those symbols, Harry added, pointing at the circle on the display. Every glyph, every line, every energy trace, copy them exactly and bring them to me. I may be able to identify the magic system if I can study the construction. Albedo looked at him. For a fraction of a second, something passed between them, not warmth, not trust, but something in the neighborhood of professional acknowledgement. She nodded once and left. Demiurge lingered. His smile was gone entirely now, replaced by the focused intensity of a predator who'd caught a scent. Lord Harold, he said, a question if I may. Ask it. The manner of your arrival in Nazarick, a spatial fracture you called it. Is it possible that the phenomenon you experienced in the circle in the eastern forest are related? Two breaches occurring in close temporal proximity from the same source. Harry hadn't considered that. He turned it over in his mind, feeling the edges of the idea, testing it against what he knew. It's possible, he said carefully. I came through a fracture, uncontrolled, violent, random. That circle is structured, deliberate. If someone or something caused both events, it suggests a controlled arrival for themselves and an uncontrolled side effect that pulled me in. Which would mean, Demiurge said softly, that your arrival here was not fate, not coincidence, but collateral damage from someone else's transportation magic. The demon's eyes gleamed behind his spectacles. Which further means, Demiurge continued, that whoever came through that circle possesses power sufficient to accidentally breach the barriers between worlds as a side effect, and they are somewhere within a day's travel of Nazarick. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Harry had ever heard. Go, Ainz said, both of you. Do what needs to be done. We reconvene at midnight. Demiurge bowed and vanished with a speed that suggested he'd been waiting for permission to sprint. Harry remained. He and Ainz sat in the war room, the magical display still glowing with the image of that circle in the dead forest, and the weight of what they'd just learned settled over them like a shroud. It could be nothing, Ainz said. A creature from another realm, a displaced beast. Not everything is a threat. Do you believe that? The crimson eyelights flickered. Number, neither do I, Harry stood. He walked to the display and studied the circle, the alien symbols, the precise geometry, the fading energy that his world-breaker senses could almost but not quite identify. There was something familiar about it, not the specific magic but the approach, the methodology. The way the symbols interlocked suggested a mind that understood magical theory at a fundamental level, not a practitioner following instructions but an architect designing from first principles. Suzuki-san, Harry said. I need to go to that circle, in person. The shadow demons can copy images, but I need to physically interact with the residual magic to analyze it properly. Alone. I'll take one of the guardians as backup, whoever you trust most, Ainz considered. Shaltir is the most powerful in direct combat, but her judgment in the field is inconsistent. Cocytus is reliable but slow-moving for a scouting mission. Demiurge is indispensable here. The twins are skilled but young. What about Albedo? You want to take Albedo, the guardian who has openly stated she doesn't trust you. I want the guardian who's most motivated to prove I'm a threat. If we're walking into an unknown situation, I want someone watching my back who won't give me the benefit of the doubt. Albedo will catch things the others miss because she's looking for reasons to doubt me. Ainz stared at him, the green aura flickered, emotion spiking, being suppressed. That is either the most brilliant reasoning I've heard since arriving in this world or the most suicidal. Possibly both. I'll inform Albedo. Ainz paused. Kimura-san, be careful, not because I doubt your power, because whatever made that circle might be the first thing in this world that warrants caution. Harry nodded. He turned from the display and headed for the door, his mind already racing through scenarios, strategies, contingencies. The world breaker in him was humming, not with fear but with anticipation. A new magic system, a new variable, something unknown. In Yggdrasil, the unknown had been his hunting ground. Every new spell he'd witnessed had made him stronger. Every new system he'd encountered had expanded his arsenal. If whatever came through that circle had magic he'd never seen before. He paused at the door, looked back at Ainz, still sitting in the command chair, skeletal hands folded, crimson eyes burning steady. Hey, Suzuki-san, we're going to be fine. You don't know that number, but I believe it. And right now, belief is the only currency we've got. He left the war room. Behind him, the Overlord of Nazarick sat alone with the glowing display, and the silence and the slow, steady pulse of a tomb that was waking up to the fact that the world outside its walls was bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And somewhere in the eastern forest, in a circle of dead trees and sterile soil, symbols carved into the earth pulsed with an energy that was growing fainter by the hour, but not gone, not yet. Whatever had come through that circle was out there, moving. Thinking, planning. And the new world, which had barely begun to comprehend the arrival of one impossibility from another reality, was about to learn that impossibilities, like disasters, rarely traveled alone. In Demiurge's private study, a meticulously organized space that reflected his analytical mind in every detail, the demon sat at his desk and opened a leather-bound journal. He dipped a pen in ink and began to write, his handwriting as precise and controlled as everything else about him. Day 1. Observations regarding the 42nd Supreme Being. Lord Harold Ashenbane demonstrates combat capabilities that exceed initial projections by a significant margin. His elimination of the Eastern Horde, including a grand catastrophe Dragon Lord, was achieved through a single spell sequence of extraordinary efficiency. More notable than the raw power, however, was the tactical precision. He did not simply destroy the threat, he consumed it. Every unit of magical energy expended by his enemies was absorbed, converted, and redirected. This is not the methodology of a warrior. This is the methodology of an apex predator. Lord Ainz's decision to elevate Lord Harold to Supreme Being status is, upon reflection, a stroke of genius so profound that I am only now beginning to glimpse its implications. Demiurge paused, set down his pen, removed his spectacles and polished them on his sleeve, a habit he'd developed in the hours since gaining true consciousness, a gesture that helped him think. Lord Ainz did not simply name an ally. He bound the single most dangerous individual in this world to Nazarick through bonds of loyalty, purpose, and mutual dependence. Had Lord Harold arrived as an outsider, an unaffiliated power with no allegiance, he would represent an existential threat. Instead, he is ours. He is Nazarick's sword and shield, yoked to our cause by Lord Ainz's masterful manipulation of circumstances. He put his spectacles back on, picked up the pen. I initially assumed Lord Ainz's strategy was containment. I now believe it is something far more elegant. Lord Ainz has not chained a god. He has given a god something to believe in, and a god who believes is infinitely more valuable than a god who is merely contained. Demiurge closed the journal. He sat in the silence of his study, listening to the deep pulse of Nazarick around him, and allowed himself a rare moment of genuine admiration. Then he opened a fresh page and began planning. There was work to do. Chapter 3. The kingdom trembles. The eastern forest smelled like death. Not the dramatic, sulphurous death of battlefields or the sweet rot of graveyards. This was a quieter death, the absence of life so complete that even the air tasted sterile. Harry walked between trees that had been reduced to gray husks, their bark flaking like dead skin, their branches bare and brittle as old bones. Nothing grew on the forest floor. No moss, no ferns, no mushrooms. The soil was a uniform ashen gray, and when Harry knelt to press his palm against it, his world-breaker senses confirmed what his eyes already told him. Every trace of magical energy had been drained from the earth in a perfect half-mile radius. Albedo walked 3 paces behind him. She hadn't spoken since they'd left Nazarick. The silence between them was its own kind of communication. Harry could feel her attention on his back like a physical weight, constant, evaluating, searching for the crack in his armor that would confirm her suspicions. She moved through the dead forest with a predator's grace, her bardage strapped across her back, her white dress somehow untouched by the ash that coated everything else. Her wings were folded tight against her body, and her golden eyes swept the terrain with mechanical precision. Harry let her watch, let her analyze. If she was going to trust him, or at least stop actively hoping he'd reveal himself as a traitor, it would happen through proximity and evidence, not words. They reached the circle at mid-morning. It was larger than the display had suggested, 30 meters across, carved into the earth with geometric precision that made Harry's breath catch. The symbols along the circumference were unlike anything in his 12 years of Yggdrasil experience, angular where Yggdrasil's glyphs were curved, built on a base 7 numerical structure instead of the game's base 10, and layered in a way that suggested 3-dimensional thinking compressed into 2-dimensional space. Whoever had designed this circle was operating on principles that didn't just differ from Yggdrasil's magic system, they predated it. Harry crouched at the circle's edge and extended his senses. The void mantle responded instantly. It reached out toward the residual energy like a tongue tasting the air, sampling the magical signature with a precision that no other analytical tool could match. Information flowed back to Harry in waves, not words or numbers, but understanding, the intuitive comprehension that was the World Breaker's greatest gift. "This isn't Yggdrasil magic," he said. Albedo's voice came from behind him, clipped and professional. Demiurge's analysis suggested as much. "It's not wild magic either, and it's not this world's native-tier magic." Harry traced one of the symbols with his finger, not touching it, hovering a centimeter above the carved line. His mana pulsed in response, trying to synchronize with the trace energy. "It's something older, foundational, like the underlying code that all magic systems are built on top of. You can read it, not yet, but I can feel it. Give me a minute." He closed his eyes. The void mantle expanded outward from his consciousness, enveloping the circle in a sphere of analytical intent. He'd done this thousands of times in Yggdrasil, encountering a new spell, letting the mantle deconstruct it, adding it to his library. But this was different. This magic resisted deconstruction, not because it was shielded or protected, but because the grammar was different. Like trying to parse a sentence in a language that didn't use the same parts of speech. He pushed deeper. The magic pushed back, not aggressively, curiously, as if something in the residual energy recognized that it was being examined and wanted to examine in return. Harry felt a presence, not a consciousness, nothing so defined but an imprint, the ghost of an intention left behind in the casting. Whoever had used this circle had poured so much power into it that their magical signature was burned into the earth like a brand. The signature was enormous, not just powerful, vast, like looking at the ocean and trying to gauge its depth by the color of the surface. Harry's world-breaker senses could measure magical energy with precision that bordered on the absurd, and what he measured here made the grand catastrophe Dragon Lord from yesterday feel like a candle next to a bonfire. He opened his eyes. "We have a problem." Albedo was beside him instantly, bardage in hand, golden eyes scanning the tree line. "Threat, not immediate, but the being that came through this circle is operating at a power level I can't fully quantify from trace signatures alone. It's not a monster, it's not a displaced creature. This circle was designed by an intelligence, a sophisticated one, using a magic system I've never encountered." He stood. "And based on the energy decay rate, they've had about 30 hours to move, orient, and plan." Albedo's jaw tightened. Direction of departure. Harry reached out with his senses again, following the trail of disrupted ambient mana that the being had left in its wake. In the dead zone, the trail was invisible, everything had been drained equally. But at the edge of the half-mile radius, where dead forest met living forest, the trail became clear. A line of subtly disturbed energy heading northwest. "Northwest," Harry said, "toward the Riesti's kingdom." Yeah, they stood in the dead circle, surrounded by gray husks and sterile soil, and the implications settled over them like fog. "We report to Lord Ainz," Albedo said. "It wasn't a suggestion." "Agreed, but we follow the trail first, as far as we can without engaging." Albedo's eyes narrowed. Lord Ainz instructed us to investigate the circle, not to pursue an unknown entity of extreme power into foreign territory. Lord Ainz instructed us to gather intelligence. The circle is dead evidence. The trail is live intelligence. If we lose it, we lose our only lead on this thing's location and intentions. Harry met her gaze directly. I'm not proposing we fight it. I'm proposing we track it. There's a difference. The Guardian Overseer held his stare for a long moment. Harry could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, duty to Ainz's explicit orders versus the tactical value of pursuing the trail, personal suspicion of Harry versus professional acknowledgement that his reasoning was sound. If we encounter the entity, she said finally, we do not engage, we observe, we withdraw, we report. Agreed. And if you deviate from that plan, then you have my permission to drag me back to Nazarick by force. I'd love to see you try. The faintest flicker of something crossed Albedo's face. Not a smile, she didn't smile at him, probably couldn't without her programming throwing an error, but something in the vicinity of grudging acknowledgement that the comment had been mildly entertaining. They moved northwest. The trail was subtle but consistent, a thread of disrupted mana woven through the forest's natural magical field like a contrail through clear sky. Whatever had come through the circle wasn't trying to hide its passage. Either it didn't know it was leaving a trail, or it didn't care. Harry wasn't sure which possibility worried him more. They traveled fast. Harry's body, Harold Ashenbane's body, moved through the forest like it had been built for terrain like this, which it had. His avatar was spexed for agility and perception alongside magical supremacy, and every root, stone, and low branch registered in his awareness a full second before he reached it. Albedo kept pace effortlessly, her movement eerily silent for someone carrying a weapon that weighed more than most men. An hour into the pursuit, the forest thinned. The trees gave way to rolling grassland, and for the first time Harry saw the human world up close. A road, an actual beaten-earth road, rutted by cartwheels and pocked with hoofprints. It ran roughly north-south, cutting across the grassland between distant smudges of habitation. And on the road, moving in both directions, were people. Harry stopped at the tree line and watched. A merchant caravan trundled south, 3 wagons pulled by oxen, loaded with barrels and crates lashed down with hemp rope. Armed guards walked alongside, men in mismatched armor carrying spears and short swords, their faces weathered and bored. A farming family headed north on foot, a man and woman with 2 children, and a donkey laden with sacks. The children were chasing each other around the donkey's legs, while the parents walked in the tired, focused way of people who had somewhere to be and not enough daylight to get there. Normal people, living their lives, completely unaware that 2 beings of godlike power were standing 50 meters away in the shadows of a forest. The trail crosses the road, Harry said. He could feel it, the mana disruption threading through the open ground, invisible to anyone without world-breaker senses but clear as a painted line to him. It continued northwest toward a cluster of buildings visible on the horizon. A town. Ainz Ooal, Albedo said. A fortress city on the border between the Riesti's kingdom and the Baharuth Empire. Demiurge's intelligence identified it as the largest settlement in our immediate vicinity. Population, approximately 60,000, mixed economy, trade, agriculture, adventure activity. The city maintains a garrison and a functioning adventurers guild, and our mystery visitor walked straight toward it, so it would seem. Harry studied the road, the caravan, the farming family. A child's laugh carried on the wind, high and bright and utterly ordinary. He thought about the horde he'd erased yesterday. Hundreds of lives ended in seconds. Those had been monsters, animals, really, driven by instinct and fear. The people on that road were something else entirely. They had names, families, fears and hopes that had nothing to do with ancient magic or supreme beings. We need to go in, Harry said, into Ainz Ooal, on foot, visible without Nazarick's forces. Albedo stiffened. Lord Ainz has not authorized direct contact with. Lord Ainz told Demiurge to brief me on the surrounding nations. Demiurge told me we have 0 diplomatic relations with anyone. We're blind, Albedo. We know the geography and the politics from a distance, but we don't know what these people are like, how they think, what they value. What scares them, he paused, and we have a trail leading directly into their largest nearby city. We need to follow it, and we need to do it without announcing ourselves as Nazarick's rulers. You're suggesting infiltration. I'm suggesting walking into town. I'm human, I look human. I can pass for a traveler or an adventurer. He looked at her. Wings, horns, an aura of supreme beauty that bordered on the supernatural. You'll need a disguise. Something dangerous flickered in Albedo's golden eyes. You expect me to hide. I expect you to adapt. There's a difference. He turned to face her fully. Look, I know you'd rather storm in there with a legion of death knights and demand information at Bardage Point, and you could. We could conquer that city before lunch, but conquered cities don't give you intelligence. They give you rubble and refugees. I need that city functioning, its people talking, its adventurers' guild operational. I need it alive. Albedo was silent for a long, charged moment. The wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of grass and road dust and the distant tang of wood smoke from Erantl's chimneys. I can alter my appearance, she said stiffly. An illusion, basic transformation. It will suppress the wings and horns. My aura I cannot fully contain, but I can dampen it. Good enough, and Albedo, while we're in there, follow my lead. Not because I'm pulling rank, because I understand humans in a way that the Guardians don't. I was one, I still am. She didn't respond to that, but she didn't argue either, and a minute later her form shimmered. The wings folded and vanished, the horns retracted, leaving smooth skin. Her golden eyes dimmed to a more natural amber, and her dress shifted into something that still looked expensive but no longer screamed otherworldly entity. She looked like a noblewoman traveling with a bodyguard, striking, memorable, but plausibly human. Harry adjusted his own appearance. His combat gear was too distinctive, but a quick manipulation of his cloak, a minor enchantment reshaping the outer layer, gave it the appearance of a well-worn traveling coat. He kept his armor beneath it, no sense being stupid. They stepped out of the tree line and onto the road. The merchant caravan had passed. The farming family was a distant speck to the north. The road was momentarily empty, and they walked along it toward Erantle with the easy pace of travelers who'd been on the road for days. It was strange, walking among humans. Harry's senses were dialed to maximum, cataloging everything: the birdsong, the quality of the road, the distant clank of metal from Erantle's walls, the smell of livestock and cooking fires that grew stronger as they approached. The city materialized from the horizon into solid reality. High stone walls, guard towers, a main gate flanked by soldiers in tabards bearing a crest Harry didn't recognize. The gate was open. A queue of travelers and merchants waited to enter, and Harry and Albedo joined it without ceremony. Papers. The guard at the gate was a middle-aged man with a beard that was losing its battle against gray. He looked at Harry with the flat, evaluative gaze of someone who processed hundreds of faces a day and had stopped being impressed by any of them. "Traveling adventurers," Harry said. "Arrived from the south. We don't have local guild registration yet." The guard's gaze flicked to Albedo, lingered a beat longer than professional courtesy required, and returned to Harry. "Unregistered adventurers need to check in at the guild hall before conducting business in the city." Straight down the main road, large building with the twin swords insignia. "Can't miss it." "Appreciated." The guard waved them through, just like that. No magical scans, no identity verification, no ward. Harry filed that away. The city's security was a joke by Nazarick's standards, barely functional even by the standards of a world that apparently had magic. Erantle opened around them. It was a real city. Not a game environment, not a render, not an approximation, a living, breathing, messy, real city. The streets were packed with people. Merchants hawked wares from stalls and carts, their voices overlapping in a constant commercial drone. Children darted between legs, dogs nosed through gutters. A blacksmith's hammer rang from a side street. The smell was layers: bread and iron and horse and sweat and flowers and sewage and wood smoke, all braided together into something that was distinctly, unmistakably alive. Harry had spent 12 years in Yggdrasil's perfectly rendered cities with their pristine textures and algorithmically distributed NPCs. This was nothing like that. This was chaos, gorgeous, filthy, overwhelming chaos. Albedo walked beside him, and he could feel her revulsion like heat from a furnace. To a being born in Nazarick's immaculate halls, this city was a sty. But she kept her expression neutral and her pace measured, and Harry gave her silent credit for the effort. "The trail," Harry murmured, low enough for only her to hear. He could still feel it, the mana disruption threading through the city's magical field, weaker now, diffused by the ambient life energy of 60,000 humans, but still traceable. It led deeper into the city, toward the central district. They followed it, through market streets and residential blocks, past a cathedral dedicated to a god Harry didn't recognize, past a barracks where soldiers drilled with more enthusiasm than skill. The city was layers: wealth near the center, poverty near the walls, with gradients of prosperity that mapped directly onto distance from the main administrative buildings. The trail led to an inn. It was a mid-range establishment called the Golden Pavilion, 2 stories, timber and stone, with a common room that spilled noise and lamplight into the afternoon street. Not the cheapest inn in town, not the most expensive. The kind of place a savvy traveler would choose to avoid attention in either direction. Harry and Albedo entered. The common room was half full. Afternoon drinkers occupied tables along the walls, off-duty soldiers, merchants between deals, a table of adventurers comparing scars over mugs of ale. A bard in the corner was performing something slow and melancholic on a stringed instrument Harry didn't have a name for. The air was thick with pipe smoke and the smell of roasting meat. The Mana Trail ended here. Whoever they were tracking had stayed in this inn, possibly was still staying here. Harry approached the bar. The innkeeper was a stout woman with arms like a wrestler and a smile that was equal parts welcoming and evaluating. Afternoon, 2 rooms if you've got them. I've got them, silver a night, meals included, baths are extra. Her eyes moved to Albedo, and the evaluating portion of her smile won out. Noble lady traveling with a swordsman, running from something or running toward something. Toward hopefully, Harry said and dropped coins on the counter, currency he'd had Demiurge provide before leaving Nazarick, local denominations, unremarkable. Will take 2 nights, and I'm looking for someone who might have passed through recently. A traveler from the south, unusual, would have arrived yesterday or the day before. The innkeeper's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. I get a lot of travelers, love. This one would have stood out, not local. Maybe asking strange questions, unfamiliar with local customs. Or radiating enough magical energy to drain a forest, Harry didn't add. The innkeeper considered. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. There was a man, came in night before last alone on foot. No horse, no pack, just the clothes on his back, and strange clothes, mind you, like nothing I've seen. Paid in gold coins that aren't from any kingdom I know. Took a room, hasn't left it since, hasn't ordered food, hasn't made a sound. Harry's pulse quickened. Which room? Upstairs, end of the hall, room 7. She paused. He's not in trouble, is he? I don't want trouble in my establishment. No trouble, Harry said, just an old acquaintance. He took the keys she offered, 2 rooms, ground floor, and walked with Albedo to a table in the corner, away from other patrons. It's here, Albedo breathed, her dampened aura pulsed once, a brief flare of combat readiness that she suppressed immediately. The entity is directly above us. I know, Harry could feel it. Now that he was inside the building, the mana signature was impossible to miss. It filled the upper floor like a pressure change before a storm, dense and deep and patient. The being wasn't projecting, it was resting, conserving, but even at rest, its magical presence was staggering. We should withdraw, Albedo said. Her voice was steady, but her hand had moved to her hip, where the bardich would be if she hadn't left it disguised as a walking staff leaning against the wall. Report to Lord Ainz. Return with the floor guardians. And do what? Assault an inn in the middle of a human city, collapse the building, kill everyone inside. Albedo didn't flinch. If necessary. It's not necessary, not yet. Harry studied the ceiling. Rough-hewn beams, plaster between them, the faint creak of old wood. Somewhere up there in a room at the end of a hallway, something that might be a god was sitting in silence. We don't know what this is. We don't know if it's hostile. We don't know if it's a player or something from another world entirely, or some kind of natural phenomenon with a humanoid shape. All the more reason to, I'm going to talk to it. Albedo's disguised eyes flashed gold for a dangerous instant. You will not. I'm not asking permission, Albedo. Harry's voice was quiet but carried the same quality he'd heard Ainz use, not volume, not anger, just absolute, immovable certainty. I'm going upstairs, I'm going to knock on that door, and I'm going to have a conversation. You will stay down here. If things go wrong, if you feel a spike in hostile energy, if you hear combat, you get out, not to fight. To get back to Nazarick and report. Lord Ainz needs intelligence, not 2 dead subordinates. Understood. Albedo stared at him. The war behind her eyes was visible this time. Loyalty to Ainz's command. Protect the 42nd Supreme Being versus her own instinct. Let the human walk into danger and solve 2 problems at once. Duty 1, barely. If you die, she said, I will not mourn you. Fair enough. Harry stood, left the table, and walked to the stairs. The upper hallway was narrow and dim, lit by a single window at the far end that let in a slant of afternoon light thick with dust motes. The floorboards creaked under his feet. Doors lined both sides, most closed, one ajar, revealing an empty room with an unmade bed. At the end of the hall, room 7. The mana signature was overwhelming here. Standing in front of this door was like standing at the base of a waterfall. The sheer volume of magical energy pressed against Harry's senses with a force that would have been physically painful to anyone without his resistances. The void mantle surged in response, hungry, eager to analyze, and Harry held it in check with an effort of will. Not yet, don't provoke. He knocked. 3 measured raps on old wood. The sound echoed in the hallway and was swallowed by the monothic air. Nothing. He knocked again. I know you're in there, I can feel you. I'm fairly sure you can feel me. I'm not here to fight, I just want to talk. Silence, long enough that Harry began to consider his next move. Then from behind the door a voice. You followed the trail. It was a man's voice, calm, measured, speaking the local language with an accent Harry couldn't place, not because it was from a specific region, but because it sat between accents, as if the speaker was translating in real time from a language that didn't share enough common ground to produce a natural inflection. I followed the trail, Harry confirmed. You are not from this world, not a question. No, Harry said, are you? A pause. Then the lock clicked and the door swung inward. The room was small. A bed, a table, a chair, a window, Spartan even by this world's standard. And sitting on the edge of the bed, hands resting on his knees, was a man. He looked ordinary. That was the first and most unsettling thing about him. Average height, medium build, brown hair of no particular distinction. A face that was pleasant without being memorable, the kind of face you pass on the street and forget before the next intersection. He wore clothes that resembled the local fashion but didn't quite match it, as if they'd been conjured from observation rather than experience. His eyes were wrong, they were brown, a normal human brown, but behind the brown something moved, a depth, a dimension, like looking into a lake and realizing you can't see the bottom. Those eyes met Harry's and Harry felt his world-breaker senses scream. This man's mana pool was immeasurable, not large, not vast, immeasurable. Harry's analytical abilities, honed over 12 years, amplified by the void mantle, capable of quantifying the magical output of a world item, hit a wall. A smooth, featureless, infinite wall that extended in every direction and offered no handholds, no edges, no way to gauge its scope. Harry had never encountered anything like it. In Yggdrasil or out of it, you can sit, the man said, gesturing to the chair. I won't attack you. Partly because I don't want to, and partly because it would level this city, and I've grown somewhat fond of it in the day I've been here. The bread is very good. Harry entered the room. He didn't sit. He stood with his back to the wall where he could see both the man and the door. Old habits. Who are you? Harry asked. That's a complicated question. The man tilted his head, a gesture that was too precise, too calibrated, like someone performing the idea of a head tilt rather than doing it naturally. In the simplest terms, I'm a traveler. I move between realities. Not by choice, originally. The first transition was an accident, but I've been doing it long enough that it's become. A traveler between realities. Yes, using that circle in the forest. Yes, the translocation matrix, a necessary framework for controlled transition. Without it, the energy bleeds into the surrounding environment in unfortunate ways. His gaze sharpened slightly. I take it you encountered the side effects. A horde of terrified monsters nearly reached my doorstep because your arrival drained a half-mile of forest. Ah, the man had the grace to look uncomfortable. That, yes. The bleed-off is difficult to contain. In my defense, I didn't choose this destination. The Matrix identified this world as a convergence point, a place where multiple reality streams intersect, and deposited me here. The fact that I arrived near a settlement was coincidence. Near Nazarick, Harry said. Not a settlement, the great tomb of Nazarick. The man's eyebrows rose, fractionally. Nazarick, that's a name I haven't heard in. He trailed off. Something moved behind those depthless brown eyes, not recognition exactly, but recollection. Like someone flipping through a very old, very thick book, Yggdrasil, a player-created dungeon, one of the most formidable structures in that reality stream. His gaze refocused on Harry. You're from Yggdrasil, yes. And you came to this world when the reality stream collapsed. When the server shut down, yes, server. The man repeated the word like a relic. You still think in those terms, servers, games, that's charming in a tragic sort of way. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Let me be direct with you. I've been traveling long enough to know when someone is evaluating me as a threat. You're doing it right now. Your magical senses have been probing me since you walked in. So let me save you the effort. Yes, I am powerful. No, I am not your enemy. I have no interest in Nazarick or this world's politics or whatever power structures exist here. I am passing through. Passing through to where? The next convergence point, another world, another reality stream. It's what I do. He spread his hands, a gesture of openness that was, again, slightly too deliberate. I stay in each world long enough to stabilize from the transition, gather what information I need to plot the next jump and move on, usually a few days, a week at most. Harry studied him. Every instinct in his body, both the gamer instincts honed over a decade and the newer, sharper instincts of a world breaker in a real world, was firing. Not danger signals exactly, something more nuanced. The recognition that he was standing in front of something genuinely unprecedented. What's your name? Harry asked. I've had many. In this form you can call me Kalen. Is that your real name? It's a real name. Whether it's my real name depends on how you define ownership of identity across multiple iterations of existence. He paused. That was unnecessarily philosophical. I apologize. Habit. Kalen. Harry tested the name. Here's my problem with your story. You say you're passing through. You say you're harmless. But you arrived with enough magical force to kill a forest. You're sitting in a human city with a mana signature that would be detectable from miles away by anyone with magical senses, and you haven't taken a single precaution to hide yourself. Either you're careless or you're advertising. Kaelan's pleasant expression didn't change, but something shifted in those bottomless eyes. Interest. Neither. I simply don't concern myself with detection. In the vast majority of worlds I visit, nothing exists that could threaten me. It's not arrogance, it's statistical probability. I've transitioned over 300 times. In all those transitions, I have encountered exactly 4 entities capable of giving me pause. His gaze steadied on Harry. You would be the 5th, the words hung in the air, not a threat, an acknowledgement. You can feel what I am, Harry said, a world breaker, yes. I recognized the class signature the moment you entered the building. I encountered one once before in a different iteration of the Yggdrasil reality stream. Different player, similar build, considerably less refined than yours. Kaelan stood. He was Harry's height, which meant he was looking him directly in the eyes, and at this distance, the depth behind those brown irises was vertiginous. Let me be transparent. I have no desire to fight you. Not because I'm afraid, though I acknowledge you would make it interesting, but because violence between beings of our magnitude tends to produce collateral damage measured in extinction events. The people in this city deserve better than to be a footnote in our disagreement. Harry felt the truth of it. Not through magic. Kaelan wasn't using any detectable spell, but through instinct. The man meant what he said, which didn't make him safe, but it made him coherent. If you're passing through, Harry said, you won't mind answering some questions. I welcome them. It gets lonely, traveling between realities. Conversation is a luxury I rarely indulge. Harry pulled out the chair and sat. The two of them faced each other across the narrow room, a world breaker and a reality traveler, separated by 3 feet of old floorboard and the thin membrane of mutual curiosity. The previous Yggdrasil players who came to this world, Harry said, the ones who founded the theocracy, what do you know about them? Kaelan tilted his head again. Ah, the 6 great gods, yes, they arrived roughly 600 years ago by this world's calendar. A small group of players pulled through during a previous convergence event. They didn't have the infrastructure you have, no tomb, no servants. They built from scratch, used their abilities to establish a religion, a nation, a power base. Most died of old age eventually. 1 or 2 were killed by dragon lords, the true dragon lords, the ones who wield wild magic natively. They left behind artifacts, a world item or 2, and a legacy of fear toward beings from other realities. So the theocracy knows about players. The theocracy is built on players. Their entire theology is organized around the return of beings like you. Some factions welcome it, others are terrified of it. The ones who are terrified have access to the world items the founders left behind. Kaelan paused. You should be cautious with them. Not because they can match your power individually, they can't, but because world items operate on rules that supersede individual strength. The downfall of Castle and Country, in particular, is a mind control artifact that has successfully dominated a dragon lord in the past. Would it work on me? Your spell sovereignty would reject it, but your allies may not be so fortunate. His gaze was steady, knowing, you have allies. I can feel at least one more Yggdrasil signature in this building, downstairs, trying very hard to suppress an aura of murderous intent. Harry almost laughed. That's Albedo. She's protective. She's terrified, of me, of you, of the situation. She's managing it through aggression, which is a perfectly valid coping mechanism for a being hardwired for loyalty. Kaelan sat back down on the bed. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to consider it carefully. Go ahead. This world is a convergence point. Multiple reality streams intersect here, which is why beings from Yggdrasil keep arriving. The barriers are thin, the connections are strong. But convergence points are also attractors. They draw power. Over time, more beings will arrive, not just from Yggdrasil, from other streams. Some will be benevolent, some will not. The theocracy's founders were the first wave. You and your Overlord are the second. I am passing through from elsewhere entirely. There will be more. You're saying this world is going to become a crossroads. I'm saying it already is one. The question is whether the beings gathered here will cooperate or compete. History across every reality I've visited suggests the latter. He met Harry's eyes, but history is not destiny. And you, a human with the power of a god and the empathy to sit in a room and talk to an unknown entity instead of destroying it, you are not a typical variable. Harry let that settle. Outside the window, Irantal continued its afternoon business, carts rumbling, voices haggling, a dog barking at nothing. The ordinary world going about its ordinary life, unaware of the conversation happening in a cramped room above an unremarkable inn. Will you meet Ainz? Harry asked. The Overlord of Nazarick, my partner, the undead mage, Mamanga, wasn't it? In the old records, Kalen considered, I will meet him. Not in Nazarick, your tomb's defenses would react to my presence in ways that could be destructive. But I will meet him on neutral ground, here if he's willing. I'll arrange it. One condition. Kalen raised a finger. I leave when I'm ready. No attempts to detain me, recruit me, or bind me. I am not a resource to be acquired. I am a guest. Fair. Then we have an understanding. Kalen smiled, and for the first time it looked natural, the genuine expression of a person, not the performance of a concept. It's been a long time since I met someone worth talking to, Harold Ashenbane. Or do you prefer your real name? Harry is fine. Harry, a good name, simple, honest. Kalen sat back on the bed and crossed his legs. Now you came here following my trail, but I suspect you also came here to see this city for yourself. Am I wrong? You're not wrong. Then go see it, walk its streets, talk to its people, understand what you're protecting before you decide how to protect it. I'll be here when you return. Harry stood. He paused at the door. Kalen, one more question. Yes. In all the worlds you've visited, all 300, have you ever seen one worth staying in? The traveler's depthless eyes held Harry's for a long, quiet moment. Not yet, he said, but I haven't stopped looking. Harry left the room and closed the door behind him. He stood in the hallway, processing, cataloging, evaluating. Then he went downstairs. Albedo was exactly where he'd left her, sitting at the corner table with her hands folded and her disguised eyes blazing with barely contained fury. He's not hostile, Harry said, sitting across from her. You cannot possibly. He's a reality traveler. He moves between worlds. He's passing through. He has information about this world that we desperately need, including intel on the Theocracy's world items and the nature of previous player arrivals. I've arranged a meeting between him and Lord Ainz. Albedo's hands tightened on each other until her knuckles went white. You arranged a meeting between an unknown entity of immeasurable power and Lord Ainz. On neutral ground, here in Irantal, under conditions we control, and with every floor guardian on standby if things go sideways. Harry leaned forward. Albedo, I know this looks reckless, but that being upstairs could wipe this city off the map without breaking a sweat, and instead he's sitting in a rented room eating bread. He's not a threat. He's an opportunity. You don't know that. I know that killing him isn't an option, not without consequences we can't afford. So our choices are diplomacy or avoidance, and avoidance gives us nothing. He held her gaze. Trust the process. If not me, then Lord Ainz's judgment when he hears the report. Albedo held his stare for a 10 count. Then she exhaled a sharp, controlled breath through her nose and her hands relaxed. Report, she said. Everything, every word exchanged. Now, Harry told her. All of it. Kalen's nature, his claims, his knowledge of the Theocracy, his warning about convergence points. Albedo listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from hostility to calculation to something that might, in the right light, be called concern. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Lord Ainz must hear this immediately, she said. Agreed, but first, Harry glanced toward the common room's front door. I want to see this city, walk the streets, get a feel for the people. We'll need to understand this place if we're going to operate here. We are wasting time. We're gathering intelligence. Different thing. He stood and offered his hand. Come on, I'll buy you lunch. I hear the bread is very good. Albedo looked at his hand like it was a snake. Then she stood without taking it and walked toward the door. Harry followed, grinning despite himself. They spent the afternoon in Irantal. Harry walked with his senses wide open, absorbing everything, the social dynamics, the economic indicators, the military readiness, the magical infrastructure. The city was, by Nazarick's standards, laughably primitive, but it was also alive in a way that Nazarick wasn't. It had organic complexity, unpredictability, the kind of messy, chaotic energy that came from 60,000 individual wills pushing against each other every day. He stopped at a market stall and bought 2 meat pies. Handed one to Albedo, she looked at the pie. I don't require sustenance. Nobody requires a meat pie. That's not the point of meat pies. She stared at him. Then with the air of someone accepting a grave insult, she took a bite. She chewed, swallowed, and something happened to her face, a subtle softening, a flicker of surprise that she couldn't quite suppress. It's acceptable, she said. High praise. They walked on. Past the Adventurers Guild, a large, busy building that Harry catalogued for future contact. Past the city's central square, where a fountain depicted a hero slaying a dragon in a pose so anatomically improbable that Harry had to look twice. Past residential neighborhoods where laundry hung from windows and children played in alleys, and the smell of cooking dinner drifted from every other doorway. They're fragile, Albedo said quietly. Harry looked at her. These humans, she continued. Fragile, short-lived, weak. Their strongest warriors would fall to our weakest servants. Their mages couldn't challenge a death knight. Their walls would crumble before a single floor guardian. She paused, watching a woman carry a baby across the street, cooing softly. and yet they create families and cities and traditions. They fight wars over scraps of land and argue about the price of grain and fall in love and grow old and die, and then their children do it all again. She looked at Harry, and for the first time her golden eyes held something that wasn't hostility or suspicion or calculation. Why? She asked. Harry thought about it. Because they don't have a choice. They can't opt out of being fragile, so they make the best of it. That seems inefficient. It is incredibly inefficient and brave and stupid and beautiful all at the same time. Albedo didn't respond, but she took another bite of the meat pie, and she didn't call it merely acceptable this time. They returned to the inn as evening fell. Harry sent a message to Ainz through Nazarick's communication network, a magical relay system that functioned regardless of distance, and gave a compressed report. Ainz listened, asked questions, processed. "I'll come," Ainz said through the relay. "Tomorrow with Demiurge. Albedo stays with you if this Kalen is what he claims. I want our strongest warrior type on site. Demiurge will handle the analytical side. And if Kalen's lying, then we'll deal with it together." A pause. "Kimura-san, you've done well today, better than I could have. The Guardians were right to be impressed. Don't go soft on me, Suzuki-san." Perish the thought. The relay closed. Harry sat on the bed in his ground floor room, alone for the first time all day, and let the exhaustion hit. Not physical. Harold Ashenbane's body didn't tire easily. Emotional, mental. He tracked an unknown entity across miles of wilderness, walked into a human city for the first time, met a being that transcended the reality he understood, and managed to keep Albedo from killing anyone. Full day. He lay back on the bed, cheap mattress, rough sheets, nothing like the silk luxury of Nazarick, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere above him, Kalen sat in his room, a traveler between worlds, passing through. Somewhere to the north, the slain theocracy guarded world items and nursed ancient fears. Somewhere behind him, Nazarick hummed with power and purpose. And here he was, Harry Haruto Harold, a man with 3 names and no clear idea of which one was really his, lying in a rented room in a city he'd known for half a day, feeling more alive than he had in 29 years of actual living. Tomorrow, Ainz would come. Tomorrow, they'd meet the traveler. Tomorrow, the game, the real game, the one with stakes that mattered, would begin in earnest. But tonight, Irantel breathed around him, warm and human and imperfect, and Harry listened to it the way a drowning man listens to his first breath of air, and he thought, this is what's worth protecting. Down the hall in her own room, Albedo sat in the dark and stared at the wall and tried to understand why a meat pie had made her feel something she didn't have a word for. She decided eventually that the word was small, not diminished, not weak, just aware of a world beyond Nazarick's walls that was vast and complicated and full of things she hadn't been programmed to expect. She didn't like the feeling, but she didn't push it away either. And somewhere above them both, in room 7, a traveler between realities sat by his window and watched the stars of a world he'd never meant to visit, and wondered, not for the first time, but with more weight than usual, whether this might be the one worth staying for. The stars didn't answer. They never did, but they were very, very beautiful. Chapter 4. Things that break Ainz Ooal. Gown arrived in Irantel at dawn, and he did not arrive quietly. Harry had specifically asked for discretion. A low-profile entrance. 2 figures walking through the gate like ordinary travelers, blending into the morning crowd, attracting no attention. What he got instead was Ainz in a magical disguise that made him look like a tall, pale nobleman with sharp features, and an aura of authority so thick it practically had its own gravitational field, accompanied by Demiurge in a human form so handsome that 3 women walked into market stalls while staring at him before they'd made it 50 meters past the gate. "I said subtle," Harry muttered as he met them at the entrance to the Golden Pavilion. "This is subtle," Ainz replied. His disguised voice was smoother than the skeletal original, but it carried the same undertone of carefully managed panic. You should have seen Demiurge's first suggestion. He wanted to arrive in a carriage made of bone pulled by soul-bound stallions wreathed in hellfire. It would have been magnificent, Demiurge said, adjusting the cuffs of what appeared to be an impeccably tailored nobleman's coat. It would have been arson, Harry said. Come on, he's upstairs. The common room was empty at this hour, too early for the drinkers, too late for the breakfast crowd. The innkeeper gave them a nod from behind the bar, her eyes lingering on Ainz's disguised form with the instinctive wariness of a woman who'd seen enough dangerous men to recognize one wearing a mask. Harry led them upstairs, Albedo falling in behind with her hand resting on the disguised Bardich staff. They stopped at room 7. Before we go in, Harry said, turning to face Ainz and Demiurge. Ground rules, he's cooperative. He's been honest with me as far as I can verify, but his power is real. Don't probe him magically, he'll feel it and it might change the tone. Let me lead the conversation. Demiurge, observe and analyze, but don't interrogate. Ainz, be yourself, the real yourself. He'll know if you're performing. Demiurge's eyebrows rose a fraction. Ainz's disguised face betrayed nothing, but Harry caught the subtle tension in his jaw, the salaryman bracing for another high-stakes social encounter. Harry knocked. "Come in," Kaylan's voice said. "I made tea." The door opened onto the same small room, but it had changed overnight. The sparse furniture was the same, but the air felt different, warmer, settled, as if the space had been shaped by its occupant's presence into something more comfortable. A clay teapot sat on the table, surrounded by mismatched cups that Kaylan had apparently acquired from the innkeeper. Steam curled from the spout in lazy spirals. Kaylan stood by the window, dressed in the same unremarkable clothes, his ordinary face wearing an expression of genuine curiosity as he watched them enter. His depthless eyes moved from Harry to Albedo to Demiurge and finally to Ainz, where they stopped. "Mamanga," Kaylan said softly, "or do you prefer Ainz Ooal gown now?" The room went very still. Ainz's disguise flickered, a momentary loss of control that he recovered so quickly only Harry noticed. "You know my name. I know many names. Yours is attached to one of the most well-documented guild records in the Yggdrasil reality stream. 41 members, the great tomb of Nazarick. Heteromorphic players who turned a dungeon into a fortress because the rest of the world hated them for existing." Kaylan's gaze was gentle in a way that seemed impossible given the depth behind it. "I've always thought that was one of the more human stories to come out of that reality. People who were rejected building their own home." Ainz stood motionless. Harry could feel his magical energy fluctuating beneath the disguise, the undead emotional suppression firing and refiring as feelings spiked too high, were dampened, spiked again. Whatever Kaylan's words had stirred, it was hitting hard. "Please sit," Kaylan said, gesturing to the bed and chair. He poured tea into the mismatched cups with the unhurried ease of someone hosting a perfectly normal social call. "I understand there's much to discuss. I'd rather we did it comfortably." They arranged themselves. Harry took the chair. Ainz sat on the edge of the bed with a rigidity that suggested his disguised body wasn't sure how beds worked. Demiurge stood by the door, declining a seat with a polite smile, positioning himself where he could observe every person in the room simultaneously. Albedo stood against the wall opposite Demiurge, her eyes never leaving Kaylan. Two guardians at two exits, unspoken, coordinated. Harry hadn't arranged it, but he noticed and filed it away. Whatever their personal differences, Albedo and Demiurge operated as a unit when it mattered. Kaylan distributed tea. The cups were rough ceramic, the tea was amber and fragrant, and the domesticity of the scene was so wildly incongruent with the beings present that Harry felt a hysterical laugh pressing against the back of his teeth. "Harry tells me you're a reality traveler," Ainz said. His disguised voice was controlled, measured. "The Overlord mask firmly in place, that you move between worlds, that's correct." "How?" Kaylan wrapped both hands around his cup. "The short version, the space between realities is not empty. It has structure, currents, pressure gradients. With enough magical energy and the right framework, the translocation matrix you found in the forest, I can navigate those currents, step from one world to the next. And the long version would take several days and require a foundational understanding of metamagical theory that doesn't exist in this world's academic traditions. I'm happy to provide it, but perhaps we should start with more immediately relevant matters." He sipped his tea. "You want to know if I'm a threat, you want to know what I know about this world, and you want to know whether there are others like me who might arrive after I leave." "Yes," Ainz said, "to all three." Kaylan set his cup down. "Then let me address them in order. First, I am not your enemy. I have no territorial ambitions, no interest in conquest, no desire to interfere with whatever you're building here. When I leave, and I will leave, this world will be exactly as I found it, minus some bread and tea." "Words," Albedo said from the wall. Her voice was flat and hard. "Words without evidence." Kaylan glanced at her. "You're right, words are insufficient. What would constitute evidence?" "Nothing you could offer, no proof exists that would satisfy me, because any being of your apparent power could fabricate any evidence I might accept." "Albedo," Ainz began. "She's correct," Kaylan said mildly. "It's sound reasoning. Trust between beings of vastly different power levels is inherently asymmetric. The stronger party can always defect at lower cost. The only reliable basis for trust in such a dynamic is mutual interest." He looked at Ainz. "So let me establish mutual interest. You need information. I need stability during my remaining time here, a few days, no more. I can provide intelligence about this world, the theocracy, the dragon lords, and the nature of future convergence events. In exchange, I ask only to be left in peace until I depart." "And if we refuse?" Demiurge asked. His tone was conversational, pleasant. The tone of someone discussing whether while calculating kill trajectories. Then I leave now, you gain nothing, and we part as strangers. Kalen met Demiurge's gaze without flinching. I'm not making threats, Guardian, I'm describing consequences. There is a difference. Demiurge's tail, visible even through his human disguise as a slight movement at the base of his coat, twitched once. His smile didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with something that Harry recognized. The demon was intrigued. Genuinely intellectually intrigued by an entity he couldn't categorize or outmaneuver. Ainz raised his disguised hand. We accept your terms, information in exchange for non-interference. Demiurge, prepare questions. Harry, you know what we need. Albedo, he paused, keep watching. Always, my lord, she said, and meant it in at least 3 different ways. What followed was the most productive intelligence briefing Harry had experienced since arriving in the New World. Kalen spoke with the precision of an academic and the breadth of someone who had literally seen hundreds of worlds. He answered questions without evasion, offered context without condescension, and when he didn't know something, said so clearly rather than speculating. The picture he painted was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. The slain theocracy was, as Demiurge's intelligence had suggested, the most strategically relevant power in the region. Its military was organized around specialized units called scriptures, each one devoted to a specific function. The Black Scripture was the strongest, composed of individuals who carried the bloodline of the 6 great gods themselves. Their captain was reputedly the most powerful human in the world, capable of rivaling a floor guardian under specific conditions. Under what conditions? Ainz asked sharply. Equipment, Kalen said. The theocracy hoards Yggdrasil artifacts the way dragons hoard gold. Their strongest warriors are equipped with gear left behind by the 6 great gods, items that would be mid to high tier by Yggdrasil standards. Individually, they're still far beneath your guardians, but they also have institutional knowledge about fighting beings like you. They've had 600 years to develop strategies, countermeasures, and contingencies for the return of players. And the downfall of castle and country exists, functional, held by the Black Scripture's commanding unit. It's a world item classified as a mind control type, absolute mental domination of a single target, irrespective of their resistance level. In your world's terms, it bypasses all conventional immunity. Kalen's gaze moved to Harry. As Harry's spell sovereignty would negate it, and your own world items would provide similar protection, the primary threat is to your subordinates, the Guardians specifically. The temperature in the room dropped. Not literally, Kalen wasn't using magic, but Harry felt Ainz's mana surge beneath his disguise, felt the cold fury of an undead overlord contemplating the mind control of his children. They've used it before, Kalen continued, against a true dragon lord named Brightness Dragon Lord's offspring some decades ago. Captured and dominated one of the most powerful beings on this continent. The asset is still in their possession. A dominated dragon lord, Demiurge murmured. His pen, he'd been taking notes in a small leather journal, writing at a speed that shouldn't have been possible, paused. Serving the theocracy, under permanent mind control. Correct. Demiurge wrote something in his journal, underlined it 3 times. Ainz was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and very controlled. What do they know about us, about Nazarick? As of yesterday, very little. They've detected anomalous magical signatures from your location, unavoidable given the energy output of the tomb, but they haven't identified the source. They're treating it as a potential threat, which means they've likely mobilized reconnaissance assets. Kalen paused. I should mention their reconnaissance is good, better than you'd expect from a nation at this world's technological level. They use divine magic, magical beasts, and human operatives in layered networks. Your shadow demons will catch the magical and non-human assets, but the human spies are trained specifically to avoid magical detection. You're saying we might already be under surveillance. I'm saying it would be foolish to assume otherwise. The briefing continued. Kalen laid out the dragon lords, the true ones, ancient beings of immense power who wielded wild magic and viewed players as existential threats. Most were dormant, sleeping in hidden lairs across the continent, but a few remained active. The Platinum Dragon Lord was the most relevant, a politically engaged entity who maintained a network of informants and operated through proxies to counter any player-level threats. He won't attack you directly, Kalen said. Not yet. He'll gather information first, test your defenses through intermediaries, probe for weaknesses. He's patient. He's been alive for millennia. But make no mistake, if he determines that Nazarick represents a threat to the world's balance, he will act. And wild magic at its highest expression operates outside the tier system entirely. It can do things that Yggdrasil magic cannot, such as, Harry asked, rewrite reality. Not in the flashy, destructive sense, though it can do that too. Wild magic at its peak can alter the fundamental rules of how magic works within a localized area. A true dragon lord fighting in its own territory, using its full power, could theoretically nullify your entire spell library within a defined radius. Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. His World Breaker class was built on magical absorption and redirection. If someone could change the rules of how magic functioned, could spell sovereignty counter it? Unknown. Spell sovereignty operates on the principle that all magic answers to you. Wild magic operates on the principle that reality itself is malleable. They're not contradictions, they're different axioms and a conflict between them. Kalen spread his hands. Nobody's ever tested it. You might win, you might not. The dragon lords themselves don't know. Wonderful, Harry said dryly. Kalen smiled. Welcome to being powerful. You'll find that at the highest levels, certainty is the first casualty. The briefing wound down as mid-morning approached. Kalen had given them more actionable intelligence in 3 hours than Demiurge's entire Shadow Demon network had produced in days. The demon was still writing, filling pages of his journal with dense, precise script, his tail swishing with the manic energy of a mind processing an avalanche of new data. Ainz stood. You've been more forthcoming than I expected. I have nothing to gain from your ignorance and everything to lose, Kalen said simply. An uninformed power of your magnitude stumbling through this world's politics would produce chaos. Chaos makes it harder for me to leave peacefully. Enlightened self-interest, the most reliable kind. When will you depart? 3 days, perhaps 4. The translocation matrix needs time to recharge, and I need to identify the next convergence point. Until then, I'll remain in Irantal. He paused. One last thing. Before I leave, I intend to dismantle the matrix in the forest, seal it. A functioning gateway between realities is too dangerous to leave accessible. Anyone with sufficient magical knowledge could reverse engineer it and open passages that shouldn't be opened. That's generous, Ainz said carefully. It's practical. I've seen what happens to worlds that become transit hubs. They don't last. Kalen's ordinary face held an expression that briefly revealed the weight of 300 worlds behind it, something old and tired and deeply sad. This is a good world, flawed, young, chaotic, but good. I'd rather not see it destroyed by traffic. They left room 7 in silence. Down the stairs, through the empty common room, out into the morning light of Irantal. The city was waking up around them, merchants opening stalls, children running to school, a patrol of city guards trudging through their morning route with the mechanical boredom of men who expected nothing to happen and were rarely disappointed. Ainz pulled Harry aside while Demiurge and Albedo maintained a perimeter that looked casual and was anything but. Assessment, Ainz said quietly. He's genuine, or he's the best liar in 300 realities. Either way, the intelligence is too valuable to dismiss. The theocracy concerns me. It should. A mind control world item and 600 years of anti-player preparation. That's not a fight we can sleepwalk through. And the Dragon Lords, long-term threat. We need more data before I can assess how spell sovereignty interacts with wild magic. But that's a problem for next month. The theocracy is a problem for next week. Harry glanced around the street. Normal people. Normal lives. We need to move fast, Suzuki-san. If the theocracy has already detected our energy signatures, they're planning something. The longer we wait, the more time they have to prepare. Ainz's disguised face was unreadable, but his mana fluctuated, the tell that told Harry the man underneath was thinking hard. What do you propose? Diplomatic contact with the Riesti's kingdom. Establish ourselves as a known quantity before the theocracy can frame us as monsters. If we have even one human nation willing to vouch for us, or at least not actively hostile, it changes the political calculus. You want to walk into a human kingdom and announce that the great tomb of Nazarick exists and would like to be friends. I want to walk into a human kingdom and be seen, be human, a supreme being who looks like them, talks like them, understands them. You handle the power, I handle the people. You realize what you're suggesting. Diplomacy means exposure. It means the theocracy learns exactly what we are and where we are. They're going to learn that anyway. I'd rather control the narrative than react to theirs, Ainz considered. The street bustled around them. A baker passed carrying a tray of fresh rolls, and the smell was so aggressively normal that it felt like a rebuke to the conversation's stakes. Do it, Ainz said. Take the lead on diplomatic contact. I'll remain at Nazarick and coordinate intelligence operations with Demiurge. If the theocracy moves while you're exposed, we need to be ready to respond. He paused. Take Albedo. She'll hate that. She'll protect you, which is the point. I don't need protection, number, but you need a witness. Someone who can report back to Nazarick if things go sideways. And you need someone the kingdom will find intimidating, because diplomacy works better when the person you're talking to knows you brought a weapon you didn't use. Harry looked at Ainz, really looked past the disguise, past the Overlord mask, at the salaryman underneath who was learning to think like a king because no one else would do it for him. "That's actually brilliant," Harry said. "I have moments." They parted at the city gate. Ainz and Demiurge would return to Nazarick through a gateway Ainz opened in a discreet alley, a shimmering portal that existed for 3 seconds and vanished without a trace, leaving behind a faint scent of ozone and a very confused alley cat. Harry and Albedo would continue to the capital of the Riesti's kingdom. According to Demiurge's intelligence, it was a 4-day journey by horse. For beings who could move at the speed Harry and Albedo were capable of, it was an afternoon. They traveled northwest along the main road, moving at a pace that would have broken a horse, a ground-eating stride that covered miles without apparent effort. Harry's body was tireless, each step precise and effortless, and Albedo matched him without strain. They passed caravans that saw 2 travelers and thought nothing of it. They passed patrols that registered 2 well-dressed strangers and filed it under "not my problem." The New World's roads were long and dusty and full of people with their own concerns, and 2 more faces attracted no special attention. They didn't speak for the first hour. Albedo maintained her 3-pace distance, her disguised form moving with the coiled energy of something that could explode into violence at a moment's notice. The silence between them had evolved from hostile to something more complex, a working silence, the kind that develops between people who are learning each other's rhythms whether they want to or not. Harry broke it as they crested a hill that offered a panoramic view of the countryside, patchwork farmland, distant villages, the glint of a river winding through a valley like a silver ribbon. "You didn't sleep last night," he said. Albedo's stride didn't falter. "I don't require sleep." "That's not what I said. I said you didn't sleep, not that you couldn't." A pause, 3 more strides. "I was processing the day's events." "Processing, is that what Guardians call lying awake thinking too hard?" Silence. "Then I was considering the traveler's words, about convergence points, about more beings arriving." Her disguised amber eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Nazarick has always been sufficient. Lord Ainz has always been sufficient. The idea that there are forces beyond our walls that exceed our comprehension, forces that arrive through rips in reality and speak of hundreds of worlds, is scary, insufficient," she said, with a sharpness that revealed the word she'd actually meant. "It makes what we have feel insufficient, and that is unacceptable." Harry let that sit. He understood what she was really saying, not that Nazarick was weak, but that the universe was bigger than she'd been built to handle. Her existence was defined by devotion to Ainz and protection of the tomb. The idea that threats existed on a scale that rendered both her devotion and her protection potentially inadequate was an existential crisis in miniature. "Nothing's insufficient," he said. "Things just change. Nazarick was built to be the greatest fortress in Yggdrasil. It is. Now the context is different, so we adapt. That doesn't diminish what Ainz built. It means what he built matters more than ever." Albedo said nothing. But her stride shortened, just barely, just enough to bring her from 3 paces behind to 2. Harry pretended not to notice. They reached the capital of the Riesti's kingdom by late afternoon. Riesti's was bigger than Irantal but felt smaller. The walls were higher and thicker, the buildings grander, the streets wider, but the energy was different. Where Irantal had the scrappy vitality of a border town, Riesti's had the heavy, suffocating weight of a city that had been important for too long. The architecture was designed to impress rather than function. The streets were clean in the wealthy districts and fetid in the poor ones, with nothing in between. And everywhere on banners, on uniforms, on the expressions of the nobility whose carriages clogged the main thoroughfares, was the unmistakable stench of a ruling class more interested in its own power than its people's welfare. Harry saw it immediately. He'd worked in corporate Japan long enough to recognize institutional rot, the performative busyness, the hierarchical posturing, the vast machinery of bureaucracy grinding along on momentum rather than purpose. Getting an audience with the king should have been difficult. It wasn't. Harry walked to the palace gate, told the guards he was an envoy from a foreign power requesting diplomatic audience, and was informed that foreign envoys were processed through the Ministry of External Affairs, which was located in an adjacent building, where they would need to submit a formal petition, which would be reviewed within 4 to 6 weeks, pending approval by the relevant noble committee. Harry looked at the guard looked at Harry. Behind Harry, Albedo radiated a controlled aura of menace that made the guard's hands sweat on his spear haft. "I'll submit the petition," Harry said pleasantly, "but please convey to whoever's in charge that I represent the Sorcerer Kingdom of Nazarick, that I carry authority to negotiate on behalf of its sovereign, and that the nature of our business is time-sensitive." He paused. "Also convey that we intend to be allies." We would greatly prefer that the kingdom gives us the opportunity. The guard stared, swallowed, dispatched a runner. Within 20 minutes they were escorted through the palace gates. The royal palace of Riestais was a monument to faded glory. Grand hallways lined with portraits of kings whose names had been forgotten. Chandeliers that sparkled but didn't quite illuminate. Tapestries so old their colors had blurred into memory. Guards who stood at attention with the practiced rigidity of men who knew they were decorative. They were led to an audience chamber, not the throne room, Harry noted, a secondary chamber for lesser dignitaries. The insult was deliberate and transparent, and Harry filed it away without reacting. The room held a long table, several uncomfortable chairs, and 3 people. The first was a bureaucrat, a thin man in expensive robes who introduced himself as Marquis Reven and spoke with the old precision of someone who had survived court politics by being indispensable to everyone and loyal to no one. His eyes were sharp, though, sharper than his manner suggested. The second was a soldier, tall, broad, weathered, with close-cropped gray hair and hands that had held a sword more recently than a pen. He wore armor not ceremonial, functional, and stood with the balanced stance of a man who could go from conversation to combat without a transitional thought. He introduced himself as Ainz Ooal, warrior captain of the Riestais kingdom. The third was the king. Ramposa III was old, not elderly old but worn old, the kind of aging that comes from decades of responsibility borne without adequate support. His face was lined and tired, his eyes cloudy but not stupid, his posture the careful upright of a man who knew that slouching in public would start rumors about his health. He wore a crown that was too heavy for his head, and he sat in a chair that was too hard for his age, and he looked at Harry with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and exhaustion. An envoy from a foreign power, the king said. His voice was thin but steady. We were not aware of any new nations in our southern territories. Your Majesty, Harry said and bowed, not deeply, not shallowly, the bow of an equal extending courtesy. I am Harold Ashenbane, representative of the Sorcerer Kingdom of Nazarick. We are a recently established sovereign state located south of Ainz Ooal. I've come to open diplomatic relations. Marquis Reven's pen was already moving, taking notes with a speed that suggested shorthand. Ainz Ooal hadn't taken his eyes off Harry since they'd entered. The warrior's gaze was evaluating, measuring, cataloging in the way of a man who assessed everyone he met as a potential opponent. Recently established, King Ramposa repeated, south of Ainz Ooal, in the wilderness. In territory previously unclaimed by any existing nation. We have made no incursions into the kingdom's borders and have no intention of doing so. Our purpose here is to establish a relationship of mutual benefit. Mutual benefit, Reven's voice was silk. An interesting phrase from a nation we've never heard of. What precisely does Nazarick offer? Security, trade, magical expertise beyond anything currently available on this continent. Harry kept his tone conversational, his posture relaxed. The Riestais kingdom shares a border with the Baharuth Empire, which has been consolidating military power for years. You also share a continent with the slain theocracy, whose views on non-human races and foreign powers are well documented. Nazarick offers a third option, a neutral ally with no interest in your territory and considerable interest in regional stability. You speak of stability, Ainz Ooal said. His voice was deep, direct, utterly without artifice. Yet you arrive unannounced, with no prior communication, requesting audience with the king. That suggests urgency. What are you urgent about? Harry looked at the warrior captain and felt something he hadn't expected: respect. The man was perceptive, cutting straight through the diplomatic padding to the bone beneath. In a kingdom of politicians and bureaucrats, Ainz Ooal was a refreshing anomaly, a man who dealt in truth because he couldn't be bothered to deal in anything else. The slain theocracy, Harry said. We have intelligence suggesting they're mobilizing against us. When they do, the conflict will affect every nation in this region. I'd rather the kingdom be informed and prepared than blindsided. The room shifted. Reven's pen stopped. The king leaned forward. Ainz Ooal's eyes narrowed. You're claiming the theocracy intends military action against your Sorcerer Kingdom, Reven asked carefully. I'm saying the theocracy has a 600-year history of viewing foreign magical powers as existential threats, and that Nazarick represents the most significant magical power to appear on this continent since the theocracy's founding. I don't need to claim they'll act against us. History does it for me. Silence, the kind that fills a room when everyone present is recalculating their assumptions. King Ramposa spoke. You seem very well informed for a newly established nation. Good intelligence is the foundation of good policy, Your Majesty. And this, the king's eyes moved to Albedo, standing behind Harry's chair, disguised but unmistakably formidable. your companion. She hasn't spoken, my associate prefers to observe, she's very good at it. Albedo didn't react, she didn't need to. Her presence alone, the coiled, watchful stillness of an apex predator wearing a human mask, was doing exactly what Ainz had predicted. The people in this room were diplomats and warriors. They recognized danger on an instinctive level, and Albedo radiated danger the way the sun radiated light. I would like to propose something, Harry said. A demonstration of good faith, not treaties or trade agreements, those take time we may not have, something simpler, something immediate. What did you have in mind? The king asked. Let me speak with your warrior captain, privately. Warrior to warrior without the politics. If Gazef Stronov believes I'm genuine, that should carry weight. The room reacted. Revan's eyebrows rose. The king looked at Gazef. Gazef looked at Harry. You want to convince me, Gazef said. I want to show you what I am, not tell you, not perform for the court, just you and me in a training yard speaking a language we both understand. Gazef studied him. The warrior's eyes traced Harry's frame, the way he sat, the way he held his hands, the micro-tensions in his posture that revealed a body accustomed to violence. Whatever he saw, it was enough. I accept, Gazef said. The training yard, 1 hour. The palace training yard was a utilitarian space, packed earth, weapon racks, practice dummies scarred by years of abuse. A far cry from Nazarick's arena, but it had the honest, functional energy of a place where real work was done. Gazef Stronov stood at its center in his armor, a sword at his hip, his face set in the calm focus of a man preparing for something he took seriously. Harry walked in without his cloak. The afternoon sun hit his armor, the dark metal and charcoal leather of Harold Ashenbane's combat gear, and he felt the warmth on his shoulders, felt the wind stir his hair, felt the solid earth beneath his boots. Albedo stood at the yard's edge, arms folded, watching. A small audience had gathered despite the impromptu nature of the event, palace guards, a few nobles who'd heard rumors, a cluster of soldiers who recognized their warrior captain's pre-combat demeanor and didn't want to miss whatever was about to happen. Rules, Gazef asked, your choice. Swords, first blood or yield. Gazef drew his weapon, a magnificent blade clearly enchanted, its edge catching the light with a faint blue shimmer. No magic, Harry paused, no magic. That was the warrior's domain, pure physical combat, skill against skill, blade against blade. For Gazef, it was the most honest form of contest. For Harry, it was a handicap so severe it was almost comical. The World Breaker class was built around magical supremacy. His physical stats were excellent by player standards, but they weren't his primary advantage. Then again, that was the point. Harry reached for the weapon at his hip, a sword he'd carried since character creation, a blade called Ashbringer that he'd enchanted so many times its magical signature was a symphony. He drew it. The blade was dark metal, single-edged, slightly curved, and it sang as it cleared the scabbard, a faint, high note that made every head in the yard turn. First blood or yield, Harry agreed. They faced each other across 10 feet of packed earth. Gazef settled into a stance that was textbook perfect and slightly personal, a foundation taught by masters, refined by decades of actual combat. His weight was centered, his blade angled, his eyes locked on Harry's center mass. Harry mirrored him. His body, Harold's body, remembered stances he'd only ever performed through a game interface, but the muscle memory was real now, encoded in fibers and tendons and the deep proprioceptive awareness of a frame built for combat. Gazef moved first. The warrior was fast, not fast by floor guardian standards, not fast by max-level player standards, but fast by any reasonable human measure. He closed the distance in 2 strides, his blade describing an arc that was simultaneously an attack and a probe, testing Harry's reaction speed, his footwork, his instincts. Harry parried. The blades met with a crack that echoed off the yard's stone walls, and he felt the impact travel up his arm, real force, real weight, the committed strength of a man who'd spent his life perfecting one thing. Gazef disengaged, circled, struck again. A combination this time, high, low, thrust, executed with a fluidity that made it clear this man was the kingdom's champion for reasons beyond politics. Harry met each strike. He didn't counter, not yet. He let Gazef come to him, let the warrior set the pace, let each exchange tell him something about the man behind the blade. Gazef fought with precision and power, but also with restraint, controlled aggression, never overextending, never gambling on a strike he couldn't recover from. A professional, a survivor, a man who had fought things stronger than himself and won through intelligence rather than brute force. You're holding back, Gazef said between exchanges. His breathing was controlled. Elevated but controlled. I'm listening, Harry said. Gazef's eyes narrowed, he adjusted. The next attack came faster, harder, a real assault, not a probe. 3 strikes in rapid succession, each one aimed at a different opening, each one building on the momentum of the last. It was a sequence designed to overwhelm a defender's reaction time, to force a mistake through sheer pressure. Harry deflected the first, parried the second. The third, a low cut aimed at his lead leg, he stepped over, letting the blade pass beneath his knee, and in the same motion brought Ashbringer around in a counter that stopped with its edge a quarter-inch from Gazef's throat. The yard went silent. Gazef stood frozen, the tip of Harry's sword close enough to his neck that he could feel the enchantment's cold aura on his skin. His own blade was extended in the follow-through of his low cut, committed, unable to recover in time. He'd lost, cleanly, completely, against an opponent who'd been operating at a fraction of his capacity. And the terrifying part, the part that Harry could see registering in those weathered, honest eyes, was that Gazef knew it. He knew that the man in front of him had moved with the casual precision of someone for whom this entire exchange had been a gentle warm-up. Harry withdrew the blade, sheathed it. Extended his hand. "You're extraordinary," Harry said, and meant it. "The best human warrior I've encountered in this world. And I want you to understand something, Gazef. I held back because this was a spar, not because I needed to. What you just faced was a fraction of my ability. What Nazarick represents is all of it." Gazef looked at the extended hand, then at Harry's face, then at the hand again. He took it. His grip was firm, calloused, and warm. "You could have killed me at any point in that exchange," Gazef said quietly, for Harry's ears only. "Yes, and you chose not to, not out of mercy." "Out of respect, yes." Gazef released his hand. Something had changed in the warrior's face, the guardedness of a soldier briefed by politicians replaced by something raw and personal. Warrior to warrior, as Harry had promised. "I've felt power like yours only once before," Gazef said. "A magic caster I encountered in a village south of Irantal. He saved my life and the lives of my men against an attack we couldn't survive alone. He called himself." Gazef stopped. His eyes widened. "Ainz Ooal." Harry went very still. "He was there," Gazef said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Weeks ago, a battle against a theocracy strike force. They were targeting me. My death was meant to destabilize the kingdom. This magic caster intervened. He destroyed the theocracy's forces with a single spell. I owe him my life." Harry's mind raced. Ainz hadn't mentioned this. Either it hadn't come up or Ainz had been waiting for the right moment. The Overlord had already made contact with the kingdom, not through diplomacy, but through action. He'd saved the life of the nation's strongest warrior and walked away without asking for anything in return. Brilliant. Whether it was calculated or accidental, it was brilliant. "Ainz Ooal is the sovereign of Nazarick," Harry said, "and my partner." Gazef's expression shifted. The pieces falling into place behind his eyes were almost audible. "He sent you. He trusts me to speak for us both. And I'm telling you the truth, Gazef. Nazarick isn't here to conquer. We're here to build, but we need allies, real allies. Not political arrangements that dissolve at the first sign of trouble." Gazef looked at Harry for a long, measuring moment. Then he turned toward the palace and began walking. "Come with me," he said. "The king needs to hear this, all of it, and I'll be standing next to you when you tell him." Harry followed. Behind them, at the edge of the training yard, Albedo uncrossed her arms. She'd watched the entire spar without moving, without breathing, and what she'd seen had added another crack to the walls she'd built between herself and the 42nd Supreme Being. He'd won without magic, without power, without fear. He'd won by being human, by meeting a warrior on his own terms and earning respect through the oldest language in existence. And the most dangerous part, the part that Albedo couldn't quite suppress, was that she'd found herself wanting him to win. The second audience with the king was different. No secondary chambers. The throne room itself, with its vaulted ceiling and faded grandeur and the weight of history pressing down from every stone. King Ramposa sat on his throne, Revan at his right, Gazef at his left, and Harry stood before them and told the truth. Not all of it. Not the parts about being a salaryman from Japan, or about NPCs gaining sentience, or about the existential terror of waking up in a body that wasn't yours. But the parts that mattered: Nazarick's existence, its power, its desire for peaceful coexistence, and the threat posed by the slain theocracy to any entity that disrupted the continental order. Gazef vouched for him. Not with flowery endorsements or political language, but with the simple, devastating statement: "This man could have killed me and didn't. Ainz Ooal could have let me die and didn't. I trust their intentions." From the kingdom's greatest warrior, those words carried the force of a royal decree. Revan negotiated. Of course he did. The man was a politician to his marrow. He extracted concessions, an agreement to mutual non-aggression, a framework for future trade negotiations, a promise that Nazarick would provide advance warning of any conflict that might affect the kingdom's borders. Harry gave them willingly. They cost nothing and gained everything. By the time the sun set, the sorcerer kingdom of Nazarick had its first diplomatic recognition. Fragile, conditional, hedged with caveats, but real. A foundation, they left the capital at dusk. The road south stretched before them, gilded by the last light of day, and Harry walked it with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who just accomplished something genuinely new. Albedo walked beside him, not behind, beside. She didn't comment on the change, and neither did he. They were 3 miles outside the capital, moving through open farmland under a sky that was deepening from gold to violet when Albedo stopped. Harry stopped with her. What? She was staring into the middle distance, her disguised eyes unfocused, her body rigid. Then her eyes snapped to Harry, and the amber disguise flickered, gold blazing through for an instant. Nazarick, she said. Emergency communication from Demiurge. The theocracy has mobilized. Harry's blood went cold. Details. 3 scripture-level units detected moving south from theocracy territory. Trajectory places them on an intercept course with Nazarick's surface perimeter within 18 hours. Demiurge identifies them as the Sunlight Scripture, the Windflower Scripture, and her voice tightened. The Black Scripture, the Black Scripture, the theocracy's strongest. The ones carrying the downfall of castle and country. They're bringing a world item to a first engagement, Harry said. That's not reconnaissance, that's an assassination attempt. Demiurge concurs. He believes they intend to separate Nazarick's leadership through misdirection, the lesser scriptures as distraction, the Black Scripture as the strike team, target assessment. Albedo paused. When she spoke again, her voice was flat with fury. They're targeting you, specifically. Intelligence suggests the theocracy has identified you as a human-type combatant and assessed you as more vulnerable to world item effects than Lord Ainz. Harry felt a spike of cold clarity, the particular calm that descended when danger moved from theoretical to immediate. His world-breaker senses expanded outward, scanning the darkening landscape, tasting the air for hostile magic. Nothing, not yet. 18 hours, we go back, Harry said, now full speed. Albedo's disguise shattered, wings erupted from her back, horns curved from her temples, and her golden eyes blazed with a fury so intense it was almost beautiful. The bardich materialized in her hand, its blade catching the last light of the sun. Follow me, she said, and launched into the sky. Harry pushed his physical stats to maximum and ran. The landscape blurred, fields became streaks of color. Villages flashed past like images in a flipped book. Albedo flew above him, a white streak against the darkening sky, her wings cutting the air with a sound like tearing silk. They moved faster than anything on this continent had a right to move, 2 Supreme Being-class entities in full flight, eating miles like a fire eats kindling. They reached Nazarick in under 2 hours. The tomb was awake. Every defense was active, every corridor pulsing with readied energy, every guardian at their post. Harry descended through the entrance at a dead sprint and found Ainz in the war room, fully armored, the staff of Ainz Ooal gown blazing with active enchantments, surrounded by holographic displays showing troop movements, scout reports, and tactical projections. They're coming, Ainz said without preamble. His voice was cold, the Overlord voice, the voice that didn't waver. Demiurge's latest update puts the Black Scripture at 12 hours out. The lesser scriptures are flanking, wide approach designed to pull our attention. Let them, Harry said. The lesser scriptures are a feint. We ignore them. Everything we have focuses on the Black Scripture. My assessment as well. Ainz turned to the display. Demiurge has proposed a layered defense, floor guardians at cardinal points, Pleiades as rapid response, undead legions as the outer screen. If the Black Scripture breaches the outer perimeter, they won't breach anything, Harry said, because I won't be inside the perimeter. Ainz's skull turned to face him. The crimson eyelights burned. Explain. They're coming for me. The theocracy identified me as the weaker target, the human, the one they think a world item can control. They built this entire operation around getting close enough to use the downfall of castle and country on me. Harry's smile was thin and sharp, so I'll let them. You'll let them. I go out alone, meet them in the field. They deploy the world item because that's the whole point of bringing it. The downfall hits me, hits spell sovereignty, and breaks. He let the word hang. Not fails, breaks. Spell sovereignty doesn't deflect, it rejects. The magical backlash will shatter the item's active matrix. They lose their greatest weapon, their entire strategy collapses, and I'm standing right there to drive the lesson home. The war room was silent. Every guardian present, Demiurge, Albedo, Shaltir, Cossidus, the twins, stared at Harry with expressions ranging from disbelief to awe to something that looked, in Shaltir's case, like arousal. The risk, Albedo said, her voice tight. There is no risk. Spell sovereignty is absolute. No magical effect compels me without my consent. That's not a probability, it's a law. The world breaker capstone doesn't have failure states. It either works or reality itself has broken, and if reality breaks, we have bigger problems than one world item. You're betting everything on a single ability, Demiurge said quietly. I'm betting everything on the ability my entire build was designed around. 12 years, Demiurge. 12 years of building toward one concept, magical supremacy. This is what I was made for. Demiurge's tail swished. Behind his spectacles, something ignited that fierce, almost reverential intensity he reserved for moments of strategic brilliance. He turned to Ainz. Lord Ainz, the demon said, Lord Harold's plan is audacious. It is also, I believe, precisely what the situation requires. A defensive posture validates the theocracy's assessment that we can be threatened. An offensive response, a single overwhelming demonstration that their greatest weapon is useless, changes the strategic calculus permanently. Ainz was silent for a long time. The war room hummed around them, displays flickering with data, the deep pulse of Nazarick's defenses thrumming through the walls. If you're wrong, Ainz began. I'm not wrong. If you're wrong, Ainz repeated, and his voice carried something that the Overlord mask couldn't fully contain, something raw and terrified and desperately human. Then I lose the only other real person in this world, and I am not prepared for that. Harry held the crimson gaze, 2 men, 2 masks, one conversation that meant more than anything happening on the tactical displays. You won't lose me, Harry said. I promise. The green aura flickered around Ainz once, twice. Then it settled and the Overlord straightened, and when he spoke, his voice was steel. Guardians, Lord Harold will engage the Black Scripture in the field alone. All other forces will hold position at the perimeter. No one intervenes unless Lord Harold gives the signal or is rendered unable to do so. He looked at each Guardian in turn. Is that understood? Yes, Lord Ainz, they said in unison. Even Albedo, even her. 12 hours. Harry spent them preparing. Not tactically, there was nothing to prepare. His build was his preparation. 12 years of accumulated power distilled into a single concept, honed to a razored edge. He was the weapon, and the weapon was ready. He spent the hours on the balcony instead. The same balcony where he and Ainz had stood on his first night, looking out at the new world under alien stars. The 2 moons hung in the sky, silver and blue, and the grassland rippled in a wind that smelled like rain. Ainz found him there. Of course he did. They stood together in silence for a while. The kind of silence that doesn't need filling, that exists between people who understand each other well enough to know that words sometimes are the wrong tool. I was afraid, Ainz said eventually. When I heard they were coming, I know, not afraid that you'd lose, afraid that you'd be alone again, that I'd be alone again. The crimson eyelights dimmed. I spent years watching my friends leave Yggdrasil, one by one. Every logout that was the last logout, every see you tomorrow that turned into silence. I sat on that throne and pretended it didn't hurt because this body won't let me feel it properly. But it hurt. It still hurts. Harry didn't say anything. He just stood there, shoulder to shoulder or shoulder to rib cage, given Ainz's height, and let the words exist. When you arrived, Ainz continued, I wasn't relieved, I was terrified, because I'd been given something I'd stopped hoping for, and having something means you can lose it. And losing it after getting it back is worse than never having it at all. Suzuki-san, I'm not logging out, the simplest words, the most important ones. Ainz went very still, and the green aura flared, bright, intense, suppressing something that surged from the core of whatever passed for a soul in an undead body. No, Ainz said quietly, you're not. They watched the moons track across the sky, and the hours passed, and the wind carried the scent of rain closer, and somewhere to the north, 3 scriptures marched through the darkness toward a tomb that was waiting for them with open eyes. Dawn came gray and heavy, clouds piled on the horizon like a bruise, the air thick with moisture that couldn't quite commit to becoming rain. Harry walked out of Nazarick alone. He crossed the perimeter, past the outer defenses. Walked into the open grassland with nothing but his armor, his sword, and the vast, churning reservoir of power that was his birthright as the last world breaker. The Black Scripture found him at mid-morning. They came from the north, 12 figures moving in formation, each one radiating a magical signature that would have been formidable by this world's standards. Harry watched them approach with his senses fully extended, cataloging their equipment, their formations, their magical loadouts. Yggdrasil artifacts mid-tier, as Kaelan had predicted. Enhancement gear, buffs layered on buffs, every advantage the theocracy's 600-year arsenal could provide. At their center, carried by a woman in ceremonial robes, was an item that made the void mantle sing. The downfall of castle and country, a world item. Harry could feel it from half a mile away, a dense, complex magical construct that existed in a category beyond ordinary enchantment. It pulsed with contained power, patient and vast, waiting to be unleashed. The Black Scripture stopped 100 meters out. Their captain, a young man whose face carried the strange, ageless quality of someone with inhuman blood, stepped forward. "You are the one called Harold Ashenbane," the captain said, his voice carried across the field with trained projection. "Representative of the entity known as Nazarick, I am. The authority of the slain theocracy, guardians of humanity, servants of the six great gods, you are commanded to surrender yourself for examination and judgment. Your existence threatens the balance of this world. Submit and you will be treated with dignity. Resist." The word cut through the captain's speech like a blade, simple, absolute, carrying no anger, no fear, no negotiation, just the flat, immovable fact of refusal. The captain's expression didn't change. He'd expected this. His hand moved in a signal. The woman in ceremonial robes stepped forward. She held the downfall of castle and country before her, a delicate object, almost beautiful, radiating the kind of power that made the air itself bend. Her eyes were closed. Her lips moved in an incantation that was older than any language currently spoken on this continent. The world item activated. Harry felt it hit him. It was nothing like the dragon's wild magic. This was targeted, surgical, a precisely engineered magical assault designed to bypass every conventional defense, every resistance, every ward. It drilled through his outer protections like they weren't there, because they weren't meant to stop this. World items operated on rules above the tier system. They didn't interact with normal magic, they simply overrode it. The downfall's power reached his mind, reached for the seat of his will, the core of his identity, the place where I am lived, and hit spell sovereignty. The impact was silent. No dramatic clash, no explosion of light, no thunderous confrontation. The world item's power met an immovable principle. No magical effect compels me without my consent, and for one frozen instant, irresistible force met immovable object. Harry felt the moment of contact, felt the downfall push, felt spell sovereignty push back, felt the fundamental architecture of the world item strain against a defense that wasn't a defense at all but a law of reality as his class defined it. Then the downfall of castle and country shattered, not the physical object, the magic, the active matrix, the centuries-old enchantment structure that gave the world item its power, fractured along every line of force, every node of magical energy, every carefully maintained connection that held the spell together. The backlash erupted outward from Harry like a shockwave, and the woman holding the item screamed as the object in her hands went dark, its glow extinguished, its power emptied like water from a broken cup. The Black Scripture stared. 12 of the theocracy's finest warriors, the most powerful humans on the continent, armed with the relics of gods, backed by the authority of 6 centuries of preparation, stared at a single man standing in a field, untouched, unmoved, and the world item they'd staked everything on was dead in their comrades' shaking hands. Harry looked at them. His gray eyes were steady. His heartbeat was calm. He felt the void mantle settle back into its resting state, satisfied, having done exactly what it was built to do. "That was your best shot," Harry said. His voice carried across the field, quiet and clear. "You brought the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. You deployed it perfectly, and it broke against me like water on stone." Nobody moved. The captain's ageless face had gone pale. "I am going to let you leave," Harry continued. "All 12 of you, alive, unharmed. You will return to the theocracy, and you will deliver a message to your cardinals. The sorcerer kingdom of Nazarick does not seek war. We do not wish to be your enemy. But if you come at us again with scriptures, with world items, with anything your arsenal contains, I will not be this merciful a second time." He paused, let the silence do its work. "Go," the captain swallowed, pride warred with survival on his face. 600 years of institutional confidence, the absolute certainty that the theocracy's weapons were sufficient, that the gods' relics would prevail, crumbled in real time behind his eyes. He gave the signal. The Black Scripture withdrew. 12 figures receding across the grassland, carrying a dead world item and the ashes of their certainty, moving with the stiff precision of people trying very hard not to run. Harry watched them go. The clouds above finally made their decision, and rain began to fall, soft, cold, steady, soaking his hair and darkening his armor and washing the last traces of the downfall's shattered magic from the air. He stood in the rain and breathed. Then he turned and walked back toward Nazarick, where the doors were open and the lights were burning, and Ainz Ooal stood at the entrance, waiting. "It's done," Harry said. Ainz said nothing. He just stood there, a skeleton in the rain, and the crimson eyelights glowed with something that emotional suppression couldn't touch, something deeper than feeling, older than programming, more fundamental than the body that tried to contain it. Harry walked past him into the warmth of the tomb. After a moment, Ainz followed. Behind them, the rain fell on the empty field where the theocracy's certainty had died, and the grass bent under the weight of water, and the world turned, and somewhere in a fortress far to the north, A surviving operative walked into a room full of cardinals and said the words that would reshape a continent's political landscape. The downfall is gone. The human broke it. He broke it by existing. And then he let us leave. The silence that followed in the theocracy's inner sanctum was the loudest sound any of them had ever heard. And in Nazarick, in the warm, dry corridors of the tomb, Harry sat in the war room and felt his hands begin to shake, not from fear, not from exertion. From the weight of what he'd just done, not the victory, not the demonstration, but the choice. 12 lives he could have ended, 12 people who'd come to enslave or kill him, and he'd let them walk away. Because mercy, when you had the power to be merciless, was the most terrifying thing you could show anyone. Ainz found him there, sitting alone, hands trembling, staring at nothing. The Overlord didn't speak. He just sat down beside Harry, the chair too small for his frame, his robes pooling awkwardly on the floor, and waited. "I could feel it," Harry said eventually. "When the downfall hit me, it tried to take me, rewrite me, turn me into a weapon aimed at you, at Nazarick. If spell sovereignty had failed, if it had worked even partially, it didn't, but if it had, it didn't," Ainz repeated. "You told me to trust your build, I trusted your build, it held." Harry looked at his trembling hands, clenched them, unclenched them, the shaking slowed. "This is what it costs," he said, "being this powerful. You stand in a field and you let people try to destroy you, and when they fail, you have to decide what kind of God you want to be. The kind that punishes or the kind that teaches, and you chose to teach. I chose to give them a chance." Harry looked at Ainz. "Because someone gave me a chance. On my first night in that throne room, you could have had me killed. You didn't. You gave me a place, a purpose, a name, and that is worth more than any world item." The green aura flared around Ainz, bright, intense, suppressing something enormous. It faded, and the Overlord sat in silence beside the human, and the rain drummed against Nazarick's walls, and the world outside was changed in ways that wouldn't become clear for weeks and months and years. But in that moment in the quiet war room, it was just two men sitting together, and that was enough. Chapter 5, What We Build. 3 weeks after the downfall of castle and country died in a rain-soaked field, Harry stood in a place that hadn't existed a month ago and watched a city being born. The site was 15 miles east of Nazarick, on a broad plateau that overlooked the river Demiurge had identified as the region's primary trade artery. The plateau was natural, everything else was not. Stone walls were rising from the earth, not built by hand, not stacked by masons, but grown by Mare's druidic magic, coaxed from the bedrock in smooth, organic curves that looked like they'd been there for centuries. The walls enclosed an area large enough for a city of 50,000, and within them, the skeleton of infrastructure was taking shape with a speed that would have given any engineer an aneurysm. Roads first. Harry had insisted on that. Not the rutted dirt tracks that passed for roads in this world, but proper paved thoroughfares, wide enough for 2 carts abreast, graded for drainage, with gutters that channeled water into a sewer system that Demiurge had designed in a single evening, and that was more sophisticated than anything on the continent. The demon had been almost giddy about the sewers. Harry had learned not to question what made Demiurge happy. After roads, water. Aqueducts fed by the river, purified through magical filtration stones that Ainz had discovered in Nazarick's treasury, Yggdrasil artifacts repurposed for mundane function, absurdly overpowered for the task but effective beyond argument. Clean water to every district. Harry had spent an afternoon watching the first fountain activate in what would become the central square, water arcing into the air with a clarity that sparkled in the sunlight, and had felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't name. Then housing. Not the cramped, leaning structures that dominated most of this world's cities, but solid buildings with foundations sunk into stabilized earth, walls thick enough for insulation, windows that actually let in light. Simple designs. Harry had overruled Demiurge's initial proposals, which had included decorative skull motifs and ambient wailing, but well constructed. Built to last, built for people. The workers were a mix. Nazarick's undead construction force handled the heavy lifting, tireless, precise, requiring no food or sleep, capable of working through the night without complaint. Human laborers from Irantal and the surrounding villages handled the finish work, carpentry, plastering, thatching, the 1,000 small tasks that required the judgment and adaptability that even the best undead lacked. Harry paid them fairly in local currency, through a treasury that Ainz had funded by converting a fraction of Nazarick's gold reserves into the regional economy. The workers had been terrified at first, humans and undead, side by side, sharing a construction site. The first week had been a tightrope walk of careful management, Harry present every day, visible, approachable, resolving conflicts before they escalated, demonstrating through sheer persistence that the undead workers were tools, not threats. By the second week, the humans had started giving the skeletal laborers nicknames. By the third week, a carpenter named Tomas had taught a Death Knight how to hold a plane, and the resulting woodwork was so flawless that Tomas had wept. Harry stood on the plateau's eastern edge, where the ground dropped away to the river valley below, and watched the sun climb over a landscape that was changing by the day. Behind him, the sounds of construction filled the air: hammers, saws, the grinding of stone, the shouts of foremen, the deep rumble of Mare's magic reshaping the earth. Ahead of him, the river wound through farmland that was being surveyed for allocation to settlers, its surface gold with morning light. Footsteps behind him. He knew who it was before she spoke. "The western residential district will be complete by nightfall," Albedo said. She stood beside him, not behind him, and had been doing so consistently for the past 10 days. Housing for 300 families. The drainage system is functional. The water supply is connected. Good. What about the market district? Foundation work begins tomorrow. Demiurge has drafted commercial regulations, taxation, licensing, trade standards. He's requested your review before implementation. I'll look at them tonight. Harry glanced at her. How's the Guardian rotation holding up? Smoothly. Shaltir's patrols have cleared the northern forest of hostile creatures. Cocytus is drilling the undead garrison. The twins are completing the topographic survey of the eastern territories. Aura reports they've mapped nearly 200 square miles. She paused. And Lord Ainz has requested your presence at Nazarick this evening. A diplomatic matter. The Empire. Harry nodded. He'd been expecting this. Jerknivrun Farlord El Nix, the bloody emperor of the Baharuth Empire, had been conspicuously silent since news of Nazarick's emergence had begun spreading through the continent's intelligence networks. The man was too smart to ignore them and too cautious to approach without leverage. Whatever move he was making, it had taken 3 weeks to prepare, which meant it would be sophisticated. "Tell Ainz I'll be there by sunset." Harry turned from the view and walked back toward the construction site. Albedo fell into step beside him, and they moved through the emerging city together, past work crews and supply wagons and the controlled chaos of civilization being assembled from raw will and impossible resources. A child ran across their path. A human girl, maybe 7, the daughter of one of the laborers, chasing a ball that had gotten away from her. She saw Harry and stopped dead, eyes wide, caught between the child's impulse to flee and the child's curiosity about the tall man in the dark coat who everyone said was some kind of king. Harry knelt. He picked up the ball, leather, crudely stitched, the kind of toy a poor family makes from scraps, and held it out to her. "Nice ball," he said. The girl stared at him. Then she snatched the ball, mumbled something that might have been "thank you," and bolted. Harry stood and kept walking. Albedo watched the girl disappear between buildings. "You do that frequently," Albedo said. "Do what?" "Interact with them, the humans, their children. You stop, you speak, you make yourself small." She didn't say it with contempt. She said it the way someone describes a phenomenon they're trying to understand. "Why?" "Because they need to see that I'm a person, not a force of nature, not a supreme being, not the man who broke a world item. A person, someone who picks up a kid's ball and hands it back." He glanced at her. "Fear is useful, Albedo, but you can't build a nation on fear alone. Fear keeps people in line, trust makes them stay." Albedo was quiet for several steps. Then, "Lord Ainz rules through awe, through the majesty of what he is. The Guardians follow him because he is worthy of devotion. What you describe, trust, approachability, is a different model. It's a complementary model. Ainz is the throne, I'm the door. People need to fear the throne enough not to challenge it and trust the door enough to walk through it. Together it works. Separately you get either tyranny or weakness." She processed this. Harry could almost hear the gears turning, not the mechanical computation of an NPC running through decision trees, but the genuine cognitive effort of a living being integrating new information into an existing worldview. Albedo had been doing this more and more over the past 3 weeks, thinking, not just executing orders or running surveillance protocols, but actually thinking about the world and her place in it. It was, Harry had decided, the most encouraging development since his arrival. They reached the construction headquarters, a temporary building near the site's center, already outfitted with Demiurge's maps and Mare's geological surveys, and a truly absurd amount of paperwork that Harry was learning to navigate with the grim determination of a man who'd survived 12 years of corporate bureaucracy in another life. He spent the afternoon on logistics, supply chains, labor schedules, resource allocation. The kind of grinding, unglamorous work that nobody wrote songs about but that determined whether a city thrived or collapsed. Demiurge's draft regulations were waiting on his desk, dense, precise, and roughly 40% more draconian than Harry felt was appropriate. He went through them line by line, adjusting, softening, adding provisions for dispute resolution and worker protections that Demiurge hadn't considered because the demon's model of governance didn't include the concept of citizens as anything other than resources. That was the ongoing negotiation, not between Harry and the Guardians, between two philosophies of rule. Nazarick's native culture was hierarchical to its core. Supreme beings at the top, floor guardians below, area guardians below that, and everything else was furniture. The idea that the humans who would populate this new city were people with rights and agency was alien to every being in the tomb except Harry and, in his more lucid moments, Ainz. Harry wasn't trying to democratize Nazarick. That would be suicidal and stupid. But he was trying to build something that could endure beyond the lifetime of its founders, a system that functioned because it was good, not just because it was powerful. The difference mattered. Ainz understood that intellectually. The Guardians were learning it experientially, one interaction at a time. Sunset found him on the road back to Nazarick, moving at the easy pace of someone in no particular hurry. The sky was doing something spectacular, layers of orange and crimson and deep violet stacked on the horizon like geological strata, the two moons already visible as pale shadows in the brightening east. The construction site was a silhouette behind him, its outline already recognizable as a city's, and the sight of it filled him with something he was learning to call pride. Nazarick's entrance materialized from the landscape like a conjurer's trick, the perfectly symmetrical hill, the concealed doorway, the shift from natural to engineered that was invisible until you were standing on top of it. Harry descended through the outer levels, past undead sentries who bowed as he passed, past corridors that rearranged themselves to speed his journey, past the controlled bustle of a tomb that had transformed over 3 weeks from a sleeping fortress into the nerve center of a fledgling nation. He found Ainz in the study adjacent to the throne room, a private space that had become their de facto meeting room for conversations that didn't require the theatrical weight of the throne. The Overlord was seated at a desk that was slightly too small for his frame, reading a document with the intense focus of a student cramming for an exam. Demiurge stood at attention nearby, radiating the composed energy of someone who had been briefing for a while and had reached the portion of the briefing that required decisions. "Ah, Harry," Ainz looked up and the crimson eyelights brightened. 3 weeks had not diminished the small, genuine relief that crossed his features, such as they were every time Harry walked through a door. "Good timing, we have a situation. The Empire, Ainz set down the document. Emperor Jerkniv has formally requested a diplomatic summit, not through intermediaries, a personal meeting, him and me, at a neutral location of our choosing." Harry pulled up a chair and sat. "That's bold." "He's been silent for 3 weeks. Why now?" Demiurge answered. "Our intelligence suggests the Emperor has spent the intervening period gathering information through every channel available to him: spies, informants, magical reconnaissance, diplomatic back channels with the Riesti's kingdom. He now believes he has a sufficient understanding of our capabilities to negotiate from an informed position." The demon's smile was sharp. "He is, of course, catastrophically wrong about the extent of our capabilities, but he is correct that negotiation is his best option. The man is a pragmatist. What does he want? Alliance," Ainz said, "or at least non-aggression. Jerkniv is fighting a cold war with the Riesti's kingdom and a theological chess match with the theocracy. The emergence of a fourth major power on his southern border is either a threat or an opportunity, and he's smart enough to prefer the latter. And you want me there. I want you to lead the negotiation." Ainz laced his skeletal fingers together. "Jerkniv is, by all accounts, one of the most intelligent rulers on this continent. He'll see through posturing. He'll read subtext in every word and gesture. He needs to meet someone who can engage with him on that level, as an equal, not as a spectacle. And you'll be the spectacle." "I'll be the throne," Ainz said, and the faintest hint of humor flickered in his eyelights. "You're the door, your words." Harry grinned. "I'm a good influence on you." "You're a terrible influence. I've started thinking about sewers. Overlords should not think about sewers." Ainz picked up the document. "The summit is proposed for 3 days from now. Location is ours to choose. I suggest Erantal, neutral enough to satisfy Jerkniv, familiar enough for us to control the environment." "Agreed." "Demiurge, prep a security package. I want shadow demons on every rooftop and mare's nature spirits in every garden within a mile of the meeting site. Visible security stays light, honor guard only. We're projecting confidence, not paranoia." "At once, Lord Harold." Demiurge bowed and departed with the brisk energy of a man who had just been given his favorite kind of assignment. Alone in the study, Ainz and Harry sat in the comfortable silence that had become their default, the silence of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "The city's coming along," Harry said. "I saw, through the scrying pool. Mayor's wall work is extraordinary. He's a genius with stone." Shy about it, though, I complimented the Eastern Gatehouse, and he turned so red I thought he was going to faint. "That sounds like Mayor," Ainz paused. "Kimura-san, I've been meaning to discuss something with you. Sounds serious." "It is." The Overlord shifted in his chair, a gesture so human that it was briefly jarring on a skeletal frame. "The Guardians have changed since your arrival. I've been observing it, cataloging it, trying to understand the mechanism." "Changed how?" "Albedo hasn't attempted to sabotage your authority in 9 days. Demiurge includes your strategic preferences in his proposals without being asked. Cocytus has started referring to you as Lord Harold with the same tonal weight he uses for Lord Ainz. Shaltir has." He trailed off. "Shaltir has what?" "Shaltir has started a garden." Harry blinked. "A garden, a flower garden on the surface level. She tends it at night. She hasn't told anyone, but the Pleiades noticed and reported it to Albedo, who reported it to me." Ainz's eyelights dimmed, his version of a contemplative expression. "Shaltir Bloodfallen, true vampire, floor guardian of the 1st through 3rd floors, is growing roses." Harry leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "Why?" "I asked the Pleiades to discreetly investigate. Apparently, she overheard you telling a human laborer that the new city would need gardens because a city without flowers isn't a city, it's a barracks." She has not elaborated on her motivations to anyone. Something warm and unexpected bloomed in Harry's chest. He pressed his lips together against the smile that wanted to form. "They're becoming more than what they were programmed to be," Ainz said quietly. "You know that, right? The Guardians, they were created with fixed personalities, fixed loyalties, fixed parameters, but they're growing, making choices their creators never anticipated. Albedo thinking independently about governance, Demiurge questioning his own assumptions, Shaltir planting roses." The crimson lights flickered. "I don't know if that's beautiful or terrifying." "Both," Harry said. "Like everything else worth caring about." Ainz looked at him. For a moment the Overlord mask slipped entirely, and Harry saw Suzuki Satoru, tired, scared, hopeful, trying so hard to be worthy of the role he'd been given. "I couldn't have done this alone. I need you to know that. Not just the politics, not just the theocracy, not just the city. Any of it. If you hadn't appeared in that throne room I would have." He stopped. The green aura pulsed. "I don't know what I would have done, but I know it wouldn't have been this." "Suzuki-san. You would have been fine. You were already fine before I got here. You were sitting on that throne, alone, faking it, and you were making it work. I just made it easier. You made it bearable." The word hung in the air between them, heavier than it had any right to be. "Well," Harry said after a moment, "bearable is a start. Let's aim for enjoyable." Ainz laughed, the hollow, skeletal sound that had become, over 3 weeks, one of Harry's favorite things in this or any world. They spent the rest of the evening planning the summit. Strategy, logistics, talking points, contingencies. 2 men at a desk, surrounded by maps and documents, building the future one decision at a time. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet, grinding work of governance, the stuff that happened between the battles and the speeches and the moments of terrible power. Harry loved it. He hadn't expected that. In Yggdrasil, he'd been a weapon, a perfectly optimized instrument of magical destruction. In this world, he was learning that the most important things he could do had nothing to do with destruction at all. 3 days later, in a rented hall in Irantal that had been hastily upgraded from adequate to impressive through Mayor's stone shaping and Albedo's decorating instincts, Harry sat across a polished table from the bloody emperor of the Baharuth Empire and tried to decide whether he liked the man or not. Jerkniv Rune Farlord Elnix was younger than Harry had expected. Late 20s, blonde, handsome in a sharp-featured way, with eyes the color of amethyst that moved constantly, cataloging, assessing, filing. He sat with the practiced ease of a man who'd been performing royalty since childhood and had gotten good enough at it that the performance had become the person. His entourage was small, 4 imperial knights in gleaming armor, a court mage whose magical signature was solid but unremarkable, and a scribe who wrote everything down with the frantic energy of someone terrified of missing a word. Ainz sat at the head of the table in his full Overlord regalia, robes of state pooling like dark water, the staff of Ainz Ooal gown planted beside his throne-like chair. He hadn't spoken since the opening greetings. He didn't need to. His presence, the sheer, crushing weight of an undead Overlord at maximum display, filled the room like smoke, and Jerkniv's entourage had been varying shades of pale since they'd walked in. Jerkniv himself showed no fear. Harry respected that. The man was terrified, his pulse was elevated, his magical aura jittery with stress hormones, but his face was carved from marble and his voice didn't waver. A performer of the highest caliber. Let me be frank, Jerkniv said after 20 minutes of preliminary pleasantries that had been elegant, meaningless, and exhausting. I know what you are, not the specifics, those are still frustratingly opaque, but the broad strokes. You are a power unlike anything this continent has seen since the six great gods. Your capabilities are, by any rational assessment, overwhelming. My military, my mages, my entire nation could not match what I've been told a single one of your subordinates accomplished against a dragon lord. That's a very honest assessment, Harry said. I'm a very honest man, when honesty is strategic, the faintest smile. So let me be strategically honest, I am here because I am afraid. Not of you specifically, though you are, I gather, individually capable of ending this meeting in ways I'd rather not contemplate. I am afraid of the situation. A new power of unimaginable strength, materializing on the borders of three nations that have maintained a fragile equilibrium for centuries. That equilibrium is already dead. The question is what replaces it, and you'd like a voice in that question. I'd like to survive that question, preferably with my empire intact. Jerkniv's amethyst eyes held Harry's. What do you want, Lord Harold? Honestly, not the diplomatic version. What does Nazarick actually want? Harry considered the question. He was aware of Ainz's crimson gaze, of Albedo standing behind him, of Demiurge discreetly observing from a side alcove. He was aware of the weight of the moment, the first honest conversation between Nazarick and a head of state who was genuinely trying to understand rather than simply react. Stability, Harry said. A nation, not an empire built on conquest, a sovereign state that trades, builds, and grows. Nazarick has the military power to take this continent by force. We could march tomorrow, and there is nothing, individually or collectively, that the nations of this region could do to stop us. You know this, I know this, let's not pretend otherwise. Jerkniv's jaw tightened, but he nodded. We choose not to, Harry continued. Not because we're weak, not because we're afraid, because conquest is the stupidest possible use of the power we have. Conquered people resist, occupied territories drain resources, empires built on force collapse the moment the force falters. We're not interested in building something that collapses. He leaned forward. We want trading partners, diplomatic relationships. A seat at the table where the continent's future gets decided, and we want the slain theocracy to stop sending kill squads to our doorstep. Jerkniv's expression shifted. Something moved behind those calculating eyes, not just political assessment but genuine reconsideration. The kind of reconsideration that happens when a person encounters something that doesn't fit their existing model of the world. You're not what I expected, Jerkniv said. What did you expect? A monster in a human suit, a weapon pointed at the world looking for a target. That's what the theocracy's intelligence suggests. That's what my own analysts predicted. He paused. You're not that number, you're a man who builds cities and negotiates trade agreements and hands children their balls back. At Harry's surprised look, Jerkniv allowed a thin smile. I told you my intelligence was thorough. Apparently, Jerkniv turned to Ainz. The Emperor faced the Overlord with the controlled courage of a man staring down a natural disaster and choosing to speak to it anyway. And you, Ainz Ooal, your representative speaks of stability and cooperation, but you sit there like a storm waiting to break. What do you want that he hasn't said? The room held its breath. Ainz was silent for a long, heavy moment. When he spoke, his voice was the deep, resonant thunder of the Overlord, but threaded through it, audible only to those who knew what to listen for, was something older and more human. I want my people to be safe, Ainz said. The beings of Nazarick are not tools, they are not weapons, they are my family. They were created by friends who are gone, built with love and care and creativity, and they are alive, every one of them. I want a world where they can exist without being hunted or feared, where their nature, undead, demon, insect, vampire, is not a death sentence. The crimson eyelights burned steady. Lord Harold builds your cities and negotiates your treaties. I ensure that the beings he builds them for have a future worth living in. That is what I want. Jerkniv stared at the Overlord for a long time. Harry could see the Emperor's mental model of Ainz Ooal cracking and reforming in real time, the terrifying Monster King being replaced by something more complex, more sympathetic, and in some ways more dangerous. A ruler who genuinely cared about his subjects was harder to manipulate, harder to predict, and harder to defeat than a tyrant. I believe you, Jerkniv said quietly. Gods help me, but I believe you. The negotiation shifted after that. The masks came down, not all the way, not completely, because politicians and rulers never fully disarmed, but enough. They talked for hours, trade routes, border agreements, mutual defense provisions, cultural exchange programs that Demiurge would later describe as the most sophisticated long-term integration strategy I have ever witnessed, attributing it naturally to Ainz's genius. By the time the sun set, the sorcerer kingdom of Nazarick had its second diplomatic relationship. This one stronger than the first, this one built on something closer to real understanding. Jerkniv departed with his entourage at dusk, his carriage rolling north through Irantle's torchlit streets. Harry watched from the hall's window until the carriage turned a corner and disappeared. "He'll honor the agreement," Harry said. Ainz stood beside him, having shed the full Overlord regalia for something more comfortable, his standard robes, which were still imposing enough to clear a room. "You're certain? He's a pragmatist. He just got the best deal he's ever going to get from a power that could crush him, and he knows it. Breaking the agreement would be the dumbest thing he's ever done, and Jerkniv Rune Farlord Elnix doesn't do dumb." Demiurge agrees with your assessment. Demiurge thinks it's all part of your master plan. Demiurge thinks everything is part of my master plan. Last week I sneezed, this body shouldn't even be able to sneeze, and Demiurge spent 2 days trying to determine the strategic significance. Harry laughed. The sound filled the empty hall, warm and human and utterly out of place in the aftermath of a geopolitical negotiation that would reshape the continent. They left the hall together and walked through Irantle's evening streets. The city was different now, not physically, not yet, but in the way its people moved and spoke and looked at the world. News of Nazarick had spread, news of the new city being built to the south, news of the theocracy's humiliation, news of a human supreme being who walked among commoners and built things instead of destroying them. The people of Irantle weren't sure what to make of it. Fear and hope mixed in their faces like oil and water, never fully blending, always present, always shifting. Harry walked through it and let them look, let them see the man inside the legend. A vendor called out to him from a stall. Lord Harold, try these, fresh tonight, best in the city." The man was holding out pastries, flaky, golden, fragrant with honey and spice. His hands trembled slightly, but his smile was genuine. A small man offering a small gift because he didn't know what else to offer a being of godlike power, and a pastry seemed like a good start. Harry took one, bit into it. It was in fact excellent. "These are outstanding," Harry said and meant it. "What do you call them?" "Honey twists, my lord, old family recipe." "Can you make them in large quantities? I'm building a city that's going to need bakers." The vendor's eyes went wide. Yes, my lord, yes, I could." "My sons, they bake too, and my wife. Come to the construction site. Ask for Foreman Tomas. Tell him I sent you. We'll set you up." The man's mouth worked silently. Then he bowed so deep his forehead nearly hit the counter. "Thank you, my lord, thank you." Harry nodded and walked on, eating the pastry. Ainz walked beside him, and Harry could feel the Overlord's gaze on the side of his face. "You just recruited a baker," Ainz said. "Cities need bakers. You recruited a baker personally. The 42nd Supreme Being of Nazarick, conqueror of the downfall of castle and country, personally recruited a man who makes honey twists. They're really good honey twists." Ainz shook his head, a motion that looked strange on a skeleton but communicated exasperation perfectly. "You are the most confusing person I have ever met. Thank you." They reached the city gate and paused. The road south stretched into darkness, lit by the moons and the distant glow of Nazarick's surface installations. The night was cool, carrying the scent of turned earth and growing things from the farmland that had been surveyed for settlement. "I have something for you," Ainz said. "I was going to wait, but this seems like the right moment." He reached into his robe, a gesture that on an undead overlord carried an inherent dramatic weight, and produced an object. Harry looked at it. It was a ring, simple. Dark metal, almost black. A single stone set in its face that was no color in every color, shifting like oil on water, pulsing with a contained energy that Harry's world-breaker senses recognized instantly as Yggdrasil-tier enchantment. Not a combat item, something else. "The ring of Ainz Ooal gown," Ainz said. "Every supreme being had one. It grants full access to all of Nazarick's systems, teleportation, communication, treasury, defensive controls. The original 41 were crafted by the guild's founders." He held it out. "This is the 42nd. I had it made in Nazarick's forge. It took 3 weeks. I wanted it to be ready for this." Harry stared at the ring. "This isn't a symbol," he said slowly. "Number, it's a key to everything, every door in Nazarick, every defensive system, every resource, complete and unrestricted access." Ainz's crimson eyelights burned steady. 3 weeks ago I named you a supreme being. That was a title. This makes it real." Harry took the ring. It was warm, unexpectedly warm, as if it had been waiting for his hand. He turned it over, feeling its weight, feeling the enchantment hum against his skin, and then he slid it onto his finger. It fit perfectly. The stone pulsed once, recognition, and then settled into a steady, quiet glow. Harry felt Nazarick open to him like a flower, every corridor, every room, every ward and trap and defensive system unfurling in his awareness like a vast, intricate map. He could feel the guardians, their positions, their status, the warm pulse of their life energies scattered across the tomb and the surrounding territory. He could feel the undead legions, the Pleiades, the maids, the constructed servants. He could feel the treasury, vast and deep, and the libraries and the laboratories and the arena and the gardens that Shaltir tended in the dark. He could feel Nazarick, and Nazarick could feel him. "Welcome home," Ainz said. Harry looked at the ring on his finger, at the road stretching south toward the tomb that had become his home, at the skeleton standing beside him who had become, against all probability and logic, the best friend he'd ever had. "I'm going to cry," Harry said. "Just so you know, this body apparently does that. I would cry too if I could. Consider yourself crying for both of us." Harry laughed, and the laugh turned into something else halfway through, something wet and raw and deeply, profoundly grateful. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and breathed until the surge passed. "All right," he said. "All right, enough sentiment. We have a nation to build." "We do." Ainz turned toward the road. "Walk with me." Always, they walked south together, two rulers, two friends, two men who had been nobody in one world and everything in another, walking a dark road under alien moons toward a tomb full of monsters who were learning, slowly and imperfectly, to be more than what they'd been created to be. The night air carried the sound of the construction site on the distant plateau, faint, rhythmic, alive. Hammers and saws and voices, the sound of something being built, not destroyed, not conquered, not imposed, built. One stone, one beam, one decision at a time. Behind them, Erantal's lights glimmered on the horizon. Ahead, Nazarick waited, ancient and powerful and changing. And between them, on the dark road, with the stars overhead and the future ahead and the past finally laid to rest, Harry and Ainz walked home. They didn't hurry. There was time. Not because the world had slowed down. If anything, the world was accelerating, the political landscape shifting by the day, the theocracy regrouping, the dragon lords watching from their ancient lairs, the convergence point drawing new variables toward it with the slow, inexorable gravity of destiny. But there was time for this, for the walk, for the quiet, for the companionship of two men who had found each other in the space between worlds and chosen, against all reason and probability, to build something together. Harry looked up at the stars, different constellations, different sky. Same fundamental question, what do we do with what we've been given? He had his answer. It was walking beside him, dressed in dark robes, wearing the face of death and the heart of a lonely man who'd refused to give up. "Hey, Suzuki-san." "I'm glad the server shut down." The crimson eyelights flickered. The green aura pulsed, brief, bright, suppressing something enormous. Then it faded, and Ainz Ooal Gown, Overlord of Death, Supreme Being of Nazarick, ruler of a fledgling nation that didn't exist a month ago, said, "So am I," and the moons rose higher, and the road unwound beneath their feet, and the great tomb of Nazarick opened its doors to welcome its masters home. Not one master, two, the way it was always meant to be.